By 280 BC, Rome had transformed from a modest city-state along the Tiber into the dominant power of central Italy. This expansion, achieved through a combination of military conquest, strategic alliances and diplomatic maneuvering, brought the Romans to the doorstep of Magna Graecia, the collection of Greek colonies that had flourished in southern Italy for over 3 centuries. The collision between Roman ambitions and Greek interests in this region would ultimately draw one of antiquity's most celebrated military commanders into Italian affairs, setting the stage for a conflict that would test both civilizations. Rome's conquest of central Italy had been methodical and relentless. Following their recovery from the Gallic sack of 390 BC, the Romans had systematically defeated the Aequi, Volsci, and other Latin tribes before turning their attention to more formidable opponents. The Samnite Wars, spanning from 343 to 290 BC, had been particularly brutal affairs that demonstrated Rome's growing military sophistication and political acumen. These mountain-dwelling warriors had controlled much of south-central Italy through their confederation, but Roman persistence and tactical innovation eventually broke their resistance. The Third Samnite War, concluded in 290 BC, had seen Roman legions operating as far south as Lucania, bringing them into direct contact with the Greek cities they had previously known only through trade and diplomacy. The Roman system of conquest differed markedly from the typical ancient approach of simple subjugation. Rather than merely imposing tribute and governors, Rome created a complex network of relationships that bound conquered peoples to their cause. Some communities received full Roman citizenship, others obtained Latin rights, and still others became allied states with specific military obligations. This system, known as the Roman Confederation, created a pyramid of loyalty that channeled the military resources of Italy into Roman hands while providing conquered peoples with a stake in Roman success. By 280 BC, Rome could call upon approximately 700,000 men from across the peninsula, a staggering figure that dwarfed the military potential of individual Greek city-states. The Greek colonies of Magna Graecia presented a different challenge entirely. These cities had been established during the Great Wave of Greek colonization between the 8th and 6th centuries BC, when land-hungry Greeks had sailed west to establish new homes along the fertile coastlines of Sicily and southern Italy. Cities like Tarentum, Croton, Sybaris, and Rhegium had grown wealthy through trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship, often surpassing their mother cities in prosperity and influence. Tarentum, founded by Spartan colonists around 706 BC, had become the largest and most powerful of these settlements, controlling a magnificent natural harbour and commanding extensive territories in Apulia and Calabria. These Greek cities had maintained their Hellenic character through centuries of interaction with native Italic peoples. They spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods, and organised themselves according to Greek political traditions, though local variations had developed over time. Their wealth came from multiple sources. The fertile plains of southern Italy produced grain, olives, and wine in abundance, while their strategic positions along Mediterranean trade routes brought exotic goods from across the known world. Tarentine purple dye, extracted from murex shells in the city's harbour, was prized throughout the Mediterranean, while the city's craftsmen produced fine pottery, metalwork and textiles that found markets from Spain to Asia Minor. The political structures of these Greek cities reflected their origins, but had evolved to meet local conditions. Tarentum, despite its Spartan heritage, had developed into a democracy by the 4th century BC, though one dominated by wealthy merchant families and landowners. The city's assembly, composed of adult male citizens, made major decisions regarding war, peace and foreign policy, but practical governance often fell to elected magistrates who represented the interests of the elite. This democratic system, while providing a voice for citizens, also created opportunities for political instability and factional conflict that would prove crucial in the coming crisis. Internal tensions within Tarentum had been building throughout the early 3rd century BC. The city's population included not only Greek citizens, but also substantial numbers of native Italians who had been incorporated through conquest or voluntary association. These groups, while enjoying certain rights, remained excluded from full political participation, creating a potential source of internal discord. Additionally, the city's wealth had created stark economic disparities, with a small elite controlling vast estates and commercial enterprises, while many citizens struggled with debt and limited economic opportunities. The Tarentine elite found themselves caught between competing pressures. On one hand, their wealth and status depended on maintaining independence and the existing political order that favoured their interests. On the other hand, the rising power of Rome presented both a threat and an opportunity. Some Tarentine leaders advocated accommodation with Rome, arguing that cooperation might preserve the city's autonomy while providing protection against other enemies. Others, particularly those with strong ties to the Greek world, viewed Roman expansion as an existential threat to Hellenic civilization in Italy and called for resistance at any cost. The complex web of relationships between Greek cities, native Italian tribes and Rome created numerous opportunities for conflict. Many of the Italic peoples who had been conquered or displaced by Roman expansion looked to the Greek cities as potential allies against their common enemy. The Lucanians, Bruttians and Samnites had all suffered defeats at Roman hands and retained significant military capabilities that could be mobilized under the right circumstances. These tribes had long-standing relationships with various Greek cities, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as allies, but always as neighbours who shared the experience of dealing with Roman pressure. The Lucanians in particular had developed close ties with Tarentum during the 4th century BC. Originally a Samnite people who had migrated south into Lucania, they had established a loose confederation that controlled much of the mountainous interior of southern Italy. Their warriors were renowned for their skill with javelins and their knowledge of guerrilla warfare in difficult terrain. Roman expansion into Lucanian territory had displaced many communities and disrupted traditional patterns of trade and seasonal migration, creating a pool of potential recruits for any leader willing to challenge Roman dominance. The Bruttians, occupying the toe of Italy, had similarly complex relationships with their Greek neighbours. These people, whose name derived from the Oscan word for rebels, had originally been slaves or dependents who had broken free from their Greek masters during the social upheavals of the 4th century BC. Despite this hostile origin, practical considerations had led to various accommodations between Bruttian communities and Greek cities, particularly regarding trade and mutual defence against common enemies. The prospect of Roman control over the entire region threatened these arrangements and provided motivation for cooperation against the expanding republic. Rome's diplomatic approach to these relationships demonstrated considerable sophistication. Rather than attempting to conquer all of southern Italy simultaneously, Roman leaders sought to isolate potential enemies by offering attractive terms to those willing to cooperate. Cities that submitted voluntarily might retain their internal autonomy, keep their traditional laws and customs, and enjoy protection against their enemies. Those that resisted faced the full weight of Roman military power, followed by harsh terms that served as examples to others contemplating defiance. The strategic importance of southern Italy's resources had not escaped Roman attention. The region's agricultural wealth was substantial, producing grain surpluses that could feed Rome's growing population and support military campaigns. The fertile volcanic soils around Vesuvius and the broad plains of Apulia yielded harvests that rivaled those of Sicily and Egypt, while the region's olive groves and vineyards produced oil and wine that commanded premium prices in Mediterranean markets. Control of these resources would significantly enhance Rome's economic foundation and reduce dependence on potentially unreliable foreign suppliers. Equally important were the harbours and trade routes that made southern Italy a crucial link in Mediterranean commerce. Tarentum's harbour, protected by a narrow entrance and capable of sheltering hundreds of ships, was among the finest in the Mediterranean. The city's location made it a natural stopping point for vessels travelling between Greece and the western Mediterranean, while overland routes connected it to the Adriatic coast and the Greek cities of Sicily. Roman control of these facilities would provide new opportunities for trade, while denying them to potential enemies. The ports of Brundisium, Rhegium, and other coastal cities offered additional strategic advantages. Brundisium's position made it an ideal launching point for expeditions to Greece and the eastern Mediterranean, while Rhegium controlled the narrow strait between Italy and Sicily. These locations had served Greek interests for centuries, but Roman possession would transform them into bases for projecting power across the Mediterranean world. The wealth generated by this trade supported not only the Greek cities themselves, but also extensive networks of craftsmen, merchants, and financiers throughout the region. Tarentine banks provided credit for commercial ventures across the Mediterranean, while the city's workshops produced luxury goods that found markets from Spain to Egypt. The disruption of these economic relationships through Roman conquest would have far-reaching consequences, not only for the immediate region but for trading partners throughout the Greek world. Roman expansion had already begun to affect these economic networks. The conquest of Campania had brought Rome control of important agricultural and manufacturing centres, while Roman colonies established in conquered territories created new markets and sources of supply. The Roman preference for direct control rather than the loose hegemony favoured by Greek cities meant that traditional trading relationships were being replaced by new arrangements that favoured Roman interests. The native Italian tribes found themselves increasingly squeezed between Roman expansion and Greek territorial claims. Many of these peoples had maintained semi-independent status for centuries, playing Greek cities against each other while preserving their own autonomy. Roman conquest threatened to end this balancing act, forcing difficult choices between submission and resistance. The Romans' systematic approach to conquest, involving the establishment of colonies and the construction of roads to facilitate military movement, made it clear that their control would be permanent rather than the temporary dominance that had characterized previous conquests in the region. These pressures created opportunities for ambitious leaders who could unite disparate groups against the common Roman threat. The Greek cities possessed the financial resources and technical expertise necessary to support large-scale military operations, while the Italian tribes could provide experienced warriors familiar with local terrain and conditions. A successful coalition might be able to challenge Roman dominance and preserve the independence of southern Italy, but such cooperation would require overcoming centuries of mutual suspicion and conflicting interests. The Romans, for their part, understood the potential dangers of allowing their enemies to unite. Their diplomatic efforts focused on preventing such coalitions while encouraging defections from existing alliances. The Roman practice of offering generous terms to early surrenders while imposing harsh penalties on prolonged resistance created incentives for the individual cities and tribes to seek accommodation rather than risk collective action. By 282 BC, these various pressures had created a volatile situation throughout southern Italy. Roman expansion had reached the point where further advances would inevitably bring conflict with major Greek cities, while the Greek cities faced internal divisions over how to respond to the Roman threat. The native Italian tribes watched these developments with keen interest, recognizing that the outcome would determine their own fate for generations to come. The stage was set for a confrontation that would draw one of antiquity's greatest military minds into the struggle for control of southern Italy. Into this volatile Mediterranean landscape stepped one of antiquity's most formidable military commanders, a man whose very name would become synonymous with costly victory and tactical brilliance. Pyrrhus I of Epirus possessed a lineage that connected him directly to the heroic age of Greek warfare and the conquests of Alexander the Great. Born around 319 BC, Pyrrhus claimed descent through his mother Phthia from Achilles himself, while his paternal line traced back to Neoptolemus, son of the legendary warrior. More significantly for his contemporaries, Pyrrhus was a second cousin to Alexander the Great through their shared acid ancestry, a connection that shaped both his self-perception and his strategic ambitions throughout his turbulent career. The kingdom of Epirus occupied a strategically crucial position along the western coast of the Greek peninsula, controlling the narrow straits between the mainland and the island of Corfu. This mountainous realm, centred on the ancient sanctuary of Dodona with its oracle of Zeus, had long served as a bridge between the Greek world and the barbarian tribes of Illyria to the north. The Molossian tribe, from which Pyrrhus's royal house emerged, had gradually extended their authority over neighbouring Epirote communities through a combination of military conquest, marriage alliances and religious authority derived from their guardianship of Dodona's sacred grove. Pyrrhus's early years were marked by the violent upheavals that characterized the Hellenistic period following Alexander's death. When Pyrrhus was barely 2 years old, his father Aeacides was driven from the throne by a coalition of rival nobles supported by Cassander of Macedonia. The infant prince was smuggled to safety by loyal retainers who carried him through treacherous mountain passes to the court of Glaucias, king of the Illyrians. This dramatic escape, involving a river crossing where the baby was supposedly tied to a spear and hurled across the torrent to waiting allies, became part of the heroic mythology that surrounded Pyrrhus throughout his life. The court of Glaucias provided young Pyrrhus with his first military education, though it differed significantly from the refined Greek instruction he might have received in Epirus. Illyrian warfare emphasized individual prowess, sudden raids, and intimate knowledge of difficult terrain. Warriors were expected to excel in single combat, to endure extreme hardships, and to display absolute loyalty to their war leaders. These lessons, absorbed during his formative years, would later influence Pyrrhus's approach to command, giving him an appreciation for personal leadership and tactical flexibility that set him apart from many contemporary Greek generals who relied primarily on rigid formations and conventional strategies. At age 11, Pyrrhus was restored to the Epirote throne through Illyrian military intervention, but his position remained precarious. The young king faced constant threats from Macedonian interference, internal, noble factions, and neighbouring tribes who viewed Epirote weakness as an opportunity for territorial expansion. These challenges forced Pyrrhus to develop political skills alongside his military education, learning to balance competing interests while maintaining the loyalty of his diverse subjects. The Epirote kingdom included not only the Molossian heartland, but also Chaonian and Thesprotian territories, each with their own traditions and local elites who required careful management. Pyrrhus's military reputation began to take shape during his participation in the complex struggles that engulfed the Greek world in the early 3rd century BC. His first major campaign came in 302 BC, when he allied with Demetrius Poliorcetes against Cassander of Macedonia. This partnership provided Pyrrhus with invaluable experience in large-scale warfare, while exposing him to the latest developments in Hellenistic military technology. Demetrius, known for his innovative siege engines and bold tactical concepts, became both mentor and rival to the young Epirot king. Under Demetrius's influence, Pyrrhus observed the effective integration of different military arms, including cavalry, infantry, and specialized units that would later characterize his own military reforms. The relationship between Pyrrhus and Demetrius exemplified the complex personal and political dynamics of the Hellenistic world. Both men possessed tremendous ambition and military talent, but their alliance was always tactical rather than genuine friendship. Pyrrhus married Demetrius's daughter Antigone, cementing their partnership while simultaneously creating potential sources of future conflict. When their joint campaign against Cassander achieved limited success, the strains in their relationship became apparent, leading to a temporary cooling of their alliance. Following a brief period of exile after Demetrius's defeat, Pyrrhus returned to Epirus in 297 BC with a clearer understanding of his kingdom's limitations and potential. The intervening years had taught him that Epirus alone lacked the resources to compete with the major Hellenistic powers, but its strategic position and military traditions could be leveraged to achieve influence far beyond its apparent capabilities. Pyrrhus began implementing comprehensive military reforms designed to transform his tribal levies into a professional army capable of challenging the great kingdoms of the East. The backbone of Pyrrhus's military system remained the traditional Macedonian phalanx, but he introduced several crucial modifications that reflected both his personal experiences and the specific conditions of Epirote society. The standard phalanx formation, with its dense ranks of sarissa-armed infantry, required extensive training and iron discipline to maintain cohesion during combat. Pyrrhus addressed this challenge by establishing a corps of professional soldiers recruited primarily from the Molossian nobility and their retainers, who received year-round training and generous compensation for their service. These elite phalangites, numbering approximately 3,000 at full strength, formed the centre of Pyrrhus's battle line and served as the foundation around which larger armies could be organised. Their equipment followed Macedonian patterns, but incorporated improvements based on recent combat experience. Each man carried a sarissa measuring approximately 18 feet in length, wore a bronze breastplate or linothorax reinforced with metal scales, and protected himself with a small shield designed to interfere minimally with pike handling. Bronze helmets, often decorated with distinctive crests that identified specific units, completed their defensive equipment. Pyrrhus's tactical innovations extended beyond simple phalanx warfare to encompass the coordinated use of multiple military arms in complex battlefield maneuvers. His cavalry, drawn from the warrior aristocracy of Epirus and allied Illyrian tribes, was organised into units that could operate independently or in support of infantry formations. These horsemen, typically equipped with long lances and swords, excelled at pursuit and reconnaissance, but could also deliver devastating charges against enemy flanks or disordered formations. The integration of war elephants into Pyrrhus's military system represented perhaps his most significant tactical innovation, and certainly his most psychologically effective weapon. These massive beasts, obtained through diplomatic and commercial relationships with Ptolemaic Egypt and the Seleucid Empire, were entirely unknown to Western Mediterranean warfare before Pyrrhus's campaigns. Each elephant required extensive support infrastructure, including specialised handlers, veterinary care, and enormous quantities of fodder, making them expensive assets that could only be maintained by wealthy kingdoms with extensive logistical capabilities. Pyrrhus typically deployed his elephants in carefully selected positions where their psychological impact would be maximised, while minimising their vulnerability to enemy countermeasures. The animals were trained to charge enemy formations on command, using their bulk and tusks to break through shield walls that could resist conventional cavalry attacks. Wooden towers, called howdahs, were mounted on their backs to provide elevated platforms for archers and javelin throwers who could engage enemy troops from positions of relative safety. The effectiveness of war elephants extended far beyond their actual combat capabilities. Horses unused to their scent and appearance would often panic in their presence, disrupting enemy cavalry formations and making coordinated attacks difficult to execute. Infantry soldiers, confronting these massive creatures for the first time, frequently broke ranks and fled rather than attempt to stand their ground against such unfamiliar opponents. This psychological advantage was particularly valuable in the opening phases of battle, when morale and unit cohesion were crucial factors in determining outcomes. However, Pyrrhus also recognised the limitations and vulnerabilities of war elephants. The animals could be turned against their own forces if wounded or panicked, potentially causing more damage to friendly troops than to the enemy. They were vulnerable to missile fire, particularly from skilled archers who could target their handlers or wound the elephants themselves. Most significantly, they were expensive to maintain and difficult to replace, making each loss a serious blow to overall military capability. The domestic situation in Epirus provided both motivation and constraints for Pyrrhus's military ambitions. The kingdom's mountainous terrain and scattered population made centralized control difficult, while traditional tribal loyalties often conflicted with royal authority. The economy remained largely pastoral and agricultural, generating sufficient resources to support the royal court and a modest military establishment, but lacking the commercial wealth that characterized the great Hellenistic cities. This economic limitation meant that Pyrrhus could maintain his professional army only through constant campaigning that provided opportunities for plunder and tribute. The Epirote nobility, accustomed to raiding and warfare as normal aspects of life, generally supported military campaigns that offered prospects for glory and enrichment. However, prolonged absences by the king and his best warriors left the kingdom vulnerable to external attacks and internal rebellions. Pyrrhus had to balance his desire for foreign conquest with the practical necessity of maintaining domestic stability, a challenge that would influence his strategic decisions throughout his career. Religious and cultural factors also shaped Pyrrhus's ambitions and methods. As guardian of the Dodona oracle, he claimed a special relationship with Zeus that legitimized his authority and provided divine sanction for his military campaigns. The oracle's pronouncements, carefully interpreted by royal priests, often supported Pyrrhus's strategic plans while providing religious justification for otherwise risky ventures. This sacred dimension of his kingship distinguished Pyrrhus from purely secular rulers and added a mystical element to his already formidable reputation. The influence of Hellenistic court culture on Pyrrhus's self-perception cannot be underestimated. Like other successors to Alexander's empire, he viewed himself as a legitimate heir to the Macedonian tradition of conquest and expansion. The competitive nature of Hellenistic kingship, where reputation and territory were constantly contested, created pressure for continuous military activity and territorial expansion. Failure to achieve significant victories could result in loss of prestige, defection of allies, and ultimately the collapse of royal authority. Pyrrhus's previous campaigns in Macedonia had demonstrated both his military capabilities and the limitations of his resources. His temporary occupation of the Macedonian throne in 288 BC, achieved in partnership with Lysimachus of Thrace, had provided valuable experience in governing a major kingdom while revealing the difficulties of maintaining control over territories far from his Epirote base. The eventual loss of Macedonia to Demetrius Poliorcetes had been a significant setback, but it also freed Pyrrhus from the burden of defending extensive territories while allowing him to concentrate his forces for new ventures. The complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterized the Hellenistic world provided numerous opportunities for ambitious rulers willing to risk their kingdoms in pursuit of greater prizes. Pyrrhus's relationship with Ptolemy II of Egypt, cemented by marriage to the pharaoh's stepdaughter Antigone, offered potential support for Western campaigns while serving Egyptian interests in containing Seleucid expansion. Similarly, his connections with various Greek cities and leagues created possibilities for intervention in their disputes, often with the promise of substantial rewards for successful mediation. By 281 BC, Pyrrhus had transformed Epirus from a peripheral mountain kingdom into a significant military power, capable of influencing events throughout the Greek world. His army, though relatively small by Hellenistic standards, was highly professional and equipped with the latest military technology. His personal reputation as a tactician and warrior had spread throughout the Mediterranean, attracting adventurous soldiers and ambitious nobles who sought service under a king renowned for his generosity to loyal followers. The arrival of Tarentine ambassadors at Pyrrhus's court in late 281 BC presented an opportunity that perfectly matched his ambitions and capabilities. The prospect of leading a coalition of Greek cities and Italian tribes against the rising power of Rome offered the possibility of establishing a Western empire that could rival the great kingdoms of the East. For a king whose hero was Alexander the Great, and whose kingdom lacked the resources for sustained eastern campaigns, the invitation to intervene in Italian affairs represented a chance to achieve lasting fame while potentially solving his domestic economic problems through the wealth of Magna Graecia. The Tarentine embassy that arrived at Pyrrhus's court in Ambracia during the autumn of 281 BC represented far more than a simple plea for military assistance. The delegation, led by the prominent citizen Meton and including several other influential members of the democratic faction, carried with them detailed intelligence about Roman military capabilities, comprehensive maps of southern Italian terrain, and most importantly, formal authorization to negotiate a binding military alliance that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Western Mediterranean. The embassy's journey to Epirus had been carefully planned to avoid Roman surveillance while maximizing diplomatic impact. Rather than sailing directly across the Ionian Sea, which might have attracted unwanted attention from Roman allies, the Tarentines had travelled north along the Italian coast to Brundisium, then crossed to Corcyra before proceeding to the Epirote mainland. This circuitous route allowed them to gather additional intelligence about Roman troop movements, while demonstrating to potential allies that Tarentum retained sufficient naval capabilities to maintain communications with the Greek world despite increasing Roman pressure. The formal presentation of Tarentine grievances against Rome followed established diplomatic protocols, but revealed the depth of anti-Roman sentiment that had crystallized in the city. Meton outlined a series of specific violations of existing treaties, beginning with the Roman naval squadron's unauthorized entry into the Gulf of Tarentum in violation of the agreement concluded in 303 BC. This treaty had explicitly limited Roman naval operations to areas north of the Licinian promontory, making the appearance of Roman warships in Tarentine waters a clear breach of international law that justified defensive action. More significantly, the ambassadors detailed Roman interference in the internal affairs of other Magna Graecian cities, particularly the establishment of a garrison in Thurii and the forced relocation of populations in recently conquered territories. These actions, they argued, demonstrated Roman intentions to eliminate Greek independence throughout southern Italy, making Tarentum's resistance a matter of Hellenic survival rather than mere local politics. The embassy emphasized that Roman expansion threatened not only individual cities but the entire network of Greek culture, commerce, and religious practice that had flourished in the region for over 4 centuries. The military alliance agreement negotiated between Pyrrhus and the Tarentine embassy established terms that reflected both parties' strategic objectives while acknowledging the practical constraints they faced. Tarentum committed to providing immediate financial support for Pyrrhus's expedition, including funds to transport his army across the Ionian Sea and maintain his forces during the initial phases of the campaign. The city's substantial treasury, accumulated through centuries of profitable trade, would cover the enormous costs of moving war elephants, siege equipment, and thousands of soldiers across open water. In exchange for this financial support, Pyrrhus agreed to provide a minimum force of 20,000 infantry, 3,000 cavalry, and 20 war elephants, along with his personal leadership and the military expertise of his professional officer corps. The agreement specified that Pyrrhus would assume supreme command of all allied forces while respecting the internal autonomy of participating cities. This arrangement balanced Tarentine desires for effective military leadership with their determination to preserve democratic institutions and local self-governance. The treaty's territorial provisions reflected careful consideration of post-victory arrangements that might otherwise have created future conflicts between allies. Pyrrhus would receive permanent control over conquered Roman territories in Apulia and Lucania, providing him with the Italian base necessary for sustained operations while offering potential rewards sufficient to justify the enormous risks of the campaign. Tarentum would retain its traditional sphere of influence in the immediate vicinity of the city, while other Greek cities would recover territories lost to Roman expansion over the previous decades. Perhaps most importantly, the alliance agreement included provisions for coordinated diplomatic efforts designed to maximise anti-Roman sentiment throughout southern Italy. Both parties recognised that military success would depend heavily on their ability to convince other Greek cities and Italian tribes to join their cause rather than accommodate Roman demands. The treaty established specific protocols for approaching potential allies, while ensuring that diplomatic initiatives would reinforce rather than undermine overall strategic objectives. The response of other Magna Graecian cities to news of the Tarentine-Epiroti alliance revealed the complex calculations that shape their individual positions regarding the impending conflict. Locri Epicepheri, the oldest Greek colony in southern Italy, found itself in a particularly difficult situation due to its geographic location on the toe of the peninsula. The city's position made it vulnerable to Roman attack from multiple directions, while limiting opportunities for effective coordination with other Greek forces. Despite these constraints, Locrian leaders ultimately decided to support the alliance, motivated primarily by their assessment that Roman victory would inevitably lead to the elimination of Greek independence throughout the region. The Locrian decision reflected careful analysis of Roman expansion patterns in other conquered territories. Roman treatment of Greek cities in Campania had demonstrated that even voluntary submission offered no guarantee of continued autonomy, while the establishment of Latin colonies in strategic locations suggested long-term plans for demographic transformation that would gradually eliminate Greek cultural and political influence. Locrian leaders concluded that resistance, despite its obvious risks, offered better prospects for preserving their city's Hellenic character than accommodation with Roman demands. Croton, once the most powerful city in Magna Graecia, faced different but equally challenging circumstances. The city's military capabilities had been severely reduced by decades of internal conflict and external pressure, making independent resistance impossible while limiting its value as an ally to either side. Crotonian leaders attempted to maintain neutrality while secretly providing intelligence and limited material support to the anti-Roman coalition. This cautious approach reflected their recognition that the city lacked sufficient strength to influence the conflict's outcome, while hoping to avoid the devastating consequences that would follow backing the losing side. The internal divisions within Croton mirrored those found in many Greek cities throughout the region. Wealthy merchants and landowners, whose commercial interests often benefited from Roman expansion and stability, favoured accommodation or neutrality. Democratic factions, supported by craftsmen and small farmers who feared economic displacement under Roman rule, advocated resistance despite the obvious military disadvantages. These factional conflicts complicated diplomatic efforts by both sides, while creating opportunities for subversion and internal sabotage that would influence the campaign's development. Thurii presented the most complex case among the major Greek cities, as Roman forces had already established a garrison within the city following their intervention in local factional disputes. The Roman military presence made open support for the anti-Roman alliance impossible, but it also intensified anti-Roman sentiment among citizens who had experienced direct occupation. Thurian leaders maintained official loyalty to Rome while secretly communicating with Tarentine representatives about potential coordination once Pyrrhus's forces arrived in Italy. The situation in Thurii demonstrated the effectiveness of Roman divide-and-rule tactics that had proven successful throughout their Italian expansion. By intervening in local disputes and supporting one faction against another, Roman commanders had created dependencies that made subsequent resistance more difficult, while providing justification for permanent military presence. However, this approach also generated resentment among the defeated factions and their supporters, creating potential sources of internal opposition that could be exploited by skilled enemy commanders. The positioning of native Italian tribes regarding the impending conflict reflected centuries of complex relationships with both Greek cities and Roman expansion. The Samnites, despite their recent defeats in the prolonged wars against Rome, retained significant military capabilities and burning desire for revenge against their conquerors. Samnite tribal councils had maintained secret communications with Tarentine representatives throughout the diplomatic crisis, preparing for coordinated action once foreign assistance arrived. Samnite military organisation, based on tribal levies led by warrior aristocrats, differed significantly from both Greek phalanx formations and Roman legionary tactics. Their fighters excelled in mountain warfare, utilising superior knowledge of local terrain to conduct ambushes and raids that could disrupt enemy supply lines and communications. The prospect of coordinating these guerrilla capabilities with Pyrrhus's professional army and Greek financial resources offered possibilities for sustained resistance that neither side could achieve independently. The Lucanian Confederation, controlling much of the mountainous interior between the Greek cities and Roman territories, found itself in an even more advantageous position for influencing the conflict's outcome. Lucanian warriors had extensive experience fighting both Greek and Roman forces, giving their leaders detailed knowledge of enemy tactical methods and organisational weaknesses. Their territory provided essential routes for communication and supply between different theatres of operation, making Lucanian cooperation crucial for any successful anti-Roman coalition. Lucanian tribal assemblies had already begun mobilising their military resources in anticipation of the renewed conflict with Rome. Their decision to support the Greek alliance reflected both immediate strategic considerations and longer-term cultural factors that aligned them more closely with Greek civilization than Roman expansion. Many Lucanian communities had adopted Greek religious practices and artistic traditions through centuries of interaction with neighbouring cities, creating cultural bonds that reinforced political and military cooperation. The Bruttian tribes, occupying the southernmost regions of the peninsula, possessed perhaps the strongest motivation for anti-Roman resistance. Their relatively recent emergence as an independent people following successful rebellions against Greek masters had created a society organised around warrior values and collective decision-making that made accommodation with Roman hierarchical structures particularly difficult. Bruttian leaders viewed Roman expansion as an existential threat to their hard-won independence and were prepared to commit their entire military potential to preventing Roman domination. Bruttian military capabilities, while limited in terms of heavy infantry and siege warfare, included substantial numbers of experienced light troops skilled in reconnaissance, harassment, and rapid movement across difficult terrain. These forces could provide invaluable support for larger armies while maintaining independent operations in areas unsuitable for conventional formations. Their knowledge of coastal regions and mountain passes would prove essential for coordinating operations between different allied contingents. Roman diplomatic efforts to counter the growing anti-Roman coalition demonstrated the sophisticated political intelligence that had enabled their successful expansion throughout Italy. Roman agents, operating through established networks of allies and commercial contacts, attempted to exploit existing tensions between potential enemy groups while offering attractive terms to communities willing to abandon the Greek alliance. These efforts focused particularly on tribal leaders who might be influenced by offers of favourable treatment or personal advancement under Roman rule. The Roman approach to Italian tribes had always emphasised the benefits of cooperation over the costs of resistance. Communities that submitted voluntarily typically retained their traditional leaders and internal autonomy while gaining access to Roman markets and protection against external enemies. This policy had proven effective in previous campaigns, creating a network of allies who provided military support while serving as examples of Roman generosity to uncommitted groups. However, the intensity of anti-Roman sentiment that had developed throughout southern Italy limited the effectiveness of these traditional diplomatic methods. Many tribal leaders had already concluded that Roman expansion threatened their fundamental way of life. making short-term concessions insufficient to secure their cooperation. The presence of a formidable foreign ally in the person of Pyrrhus provided these groups with realistic prospects for successful resistance, encouraging them to reject Roman overtures in favour of coordinated opposition. The role of existing treaties in shaping the developing conflict extended far beyond the immediate participants to include relationships with major Mediterranean powers who might influence the struggle's outcome. Pyrrhus's connections with Ptolemaic Egypt provided potential sources of additional military support and financial assistance, while his reputation throughout the Greek world attracted individual volunteers and mercenary companies seeking service under a renowned commander. Roman treaty obligations, particularly their growing relationship with Carthage, created additional complications that both sides sought to exploit. Carthaginian leaders viewed Roman expansion into southern Italy with considerable concern, recognizing that Roman control of the region's harbours and trade routes would significantly enhance their rivals' naval capabilities. However, direct Carthaginian intervention risked escalating the conflict beyond Italian boundaries, potentially triggering broader Mediterranean warfare that might threaten Carthaginian interests in Sicily and North Africa. The diplomatic manoeuvring that preceded Pyrrhus's arrival in Italy thus involved not only the immediate participants, but also a complex network of Mediterranean powers, whose decisions would influence the conflict's scope and ultimate resolution. The success or failure of the various alliances being formed would depend not only on military capabilities, but also on the diplomatic skill demonstrated by leaders on all sides as they navigated the treacherous waters of Hellenistic international relations. The winter crossing from Epirus to Tarentum in early 280 BC represented one of the most logistically complex military operations of the ancient world. Pyrrhus's expedition required the coordination of over 300 vessels of varying sizes, from massive grain transports capable of carrying war elephants to swift triremes designed for escort duties. The Epirotic king had assembled this diverse fleet through a combination of royal resources, Tarentine financial backing, and agreements with independent ship owners who saw profitable opportunities in the venture, despite its obvious risks. The composition of Pyrrhus's invasion force reflected careful consideration of the tactical challenges he expected to face in Italy. His core infantry consisted of approximately 16,000 phalangites, organised into 4 tactical units of roughly 4,000 men each. These formations represented the cream of Epirot military capability, recruited primarily from the Molossian heartland and trained to the exacting standards that Pyrrhus had developed through years of warfare against Macedonian and Illyrian opponents. Each phalangite carried the traditional 18-foot sarissa, wore bronze armour crafted in Epirote workshops, and had undergone extensive drill in the complex manoeuvres required for effective phalanx warfare. Supporting the heavy infantry were approximately 3,000 peltasts and other light troops drawn from throughout Pyrrhus's domains. These soldiers, equipped with javelins, swords, and lightweight shields, provided tactical flexibility that pure phalanx formations lacked. Many had served in previous campaigns and possessed intimate knowledge of their commander's tactical preferences, making them invaluable for reconnaissance, skirmishing, and pursuit operations. Their presence ensured that Pyrrhus could adapt his battle formations to meet the specific challenges posed by Roman tactical methods and Italian terrain. The cavalry component of Pyrrhus's expedition numbered approximately 3,000 horsemen, representing the military elite of Epirus and allied territories. These mounted warriors, organised into squadrons of roughly 200 men each, brought with them not only their military skills but also their personal retinues of servants, grooms, and equipment specialists. The logistical requirements for transporting cavalry across the Ionian Sea were staggering, requiring specially constructed horse transports with reinforced decks and elaborate systems for feeding and watering the animals during the voyage. The 20 war elephants that accompanied Pyrrhus's expedition represented perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire transportation effort. Each elephant required individual accommodation aboard specially modified vessels with reinforced hulls capable of supporting weights exceeding 4 tons. The animal's mayhouts, primarily Indian and North African specialists recruited through Ptolemaic contacts, brought with them detailed knowledge of elephant care and training that would prove essential for maintaining these valuable assets in unfamiliar Italian conditions. The elephants themselves varied in size and training, reflecting the diverse sources from which Pyrrhus had acquired them over several years of preparation. The largest specimens, obtained through diplomatic exchanges with the Seleucid Empire, stood nearly 10 feet at the shoulder and had been trained for battlefield charges against enemy formations. Smaller animals, purchased from Ptolemaic dealers, served primarily as platforms for archers and javelin throwers, who could engage enemy troops from elevated positions while remaining relatively protected from ground-based attacks. The voyage across the Ionian Sea tested both Pyrrhus's organisational capabilities and the seamanship of his diverse fleet. Winter storms in the eastern Mediterranean were notorious for their sudden intensity and destructive power, making the timing of the crossing a calculated risk that balanced military necessity against meteorological uncertainty. Pyrrhus had delayed his departure until receiving favourable reports from Tarentine scouts monitoring Roman military movements, but further postponement risked allowing enemy forces to strengthen their positions in southern Italy. The fleet's departure from multiple Epirota harbours reflected security considerations designed to minimise Roman intelligence gathering while maximising operational flexibility. The main body of infantry sailed from Ambracia under Pyrrhus's personal command, while cavalry units embarked from smaller ports along the coast to avoid overwhelming any single harbour's facilities. This dispersed approach complicated coordination, but reduced the risk of catastrophic losses if Roman naval forces attempted to intercept the expedition during its most vulnerable phase. Navigation across the open waters between Epirus and Italy relied on a combination of traditional Greek seamanship and detailed intelligence provided by Tarentine merchants familiar with seasonal weather patterns and coastal conditions. The fleet's course took advantage of prevailing winds while avoiding sea lanes regularly patrolled by Roman allies, requiring careful timing and constant communication between squadron commanders. Signal fires and trumpet calls maintained formation discipline during daylight hours, while predetermined rally points provided contingency arrangements for vessels separated by storms or enemy action. The landing at Tarentum in February 280 BC created immediate logistical challenges that tested the organisational capabilities of both Pyrrhus's expedition and their Greek hosts. The city's harbour, while spacious and well protected, lacked the specialised facilities required for rapidly disembarking large numbers of troops and their equipment. Temporary wooden ramps had to be constructed to allow war elephants to reach dry land safely, while designated areas were established for organising military units as they came ashore from different vessels. The psychological impact of Pyrrhus's arrival extended far beyond the immediate participants to affect populations throughout southern Italy. For the Greek cities of Magna Graecia, the sight of professional Epirote phalangites marching through Tarentine streets represented the fulfillment of desperate hopes for effective resistance against Roman expansion. Citizens who had watched Roman power grow with increasing anxiety now saw tangible evidence that their appeals for assistance had produced results that might preserve their independence and cultural identity. The war elephants in particular created sensations that reverberated throughout the region as reports of their appearance spread through established networks of merchants, travellers, and diplomatic messengers. Most inhabitants of southern Italy had never seen such creatures, making their presence a source of wonder, fear, and speculation about their military capabilities. Detailed descriptions of their size, equipment, and handlers circulated rapidly among both allied and enemy populations, contributing to an atmosphere of anticipation and uncertainty that would influence subsequent military operations. Roman intelligence networks, carefully cultivated throughout their Italian expansion, provided Consul Valerius Laevinus with detailed reports of Pyrrhus's landing within days of the event. These accounts, gathered through a combination of direct observation and interrogation of travellers, revealed not only the size and composition of the Epirota expedition, but also valuable information about enemy morale, equipment quality, and tactical organisation. Roman commanders had extensive experience analysing foreign military capabilities, but Pyrrhus represented a qualitatively different challenge than the tribal levies and Greek city militias they had previously encountered. Laevinus's initial response demonstrated the strategic flexibility that had characterised Roman expansion throughout Italy. Rather than attempting immediate confrontation with enemy forces still organising after their sea voyage, the consul concentrated his available legions in defensive positions that protected Roman allies while gathering intelligence about enemy intentions and capabilities. This cautious approach reflected Roman recognition that Pyrrhus's reputation as a tactician required careful preparation rather than hasty action that might result in unnecessary casualties or strategic setbacks. The Roman force available for operations in southern Italy consisted of approximately 35,000 men organised into 4 legions, plus supporting allied contingents. This army represented a substantial portion of Rome's total military capability, reflecting the seriousness with which Roman leaders viewed the threat posed by foreign intervention in Italian affairs. Each legion contained roughly 4,200 infantry and 300 cavalry, equipped and trained according to the manipular system that had proven effective against various Italian opponents over the previous century. The manipular organisation that characterised Roman tactical doctrine differed fundamentally from the phalanx formations employed by Pyrrhus and other Hellenistic commanders. Roman legions were organised into smaller, more flexible units called maniples, each containing 120 men arranged in loose formations that could adapt to varying terrain conditions while maintaining mutual support. This system emphasised individual soldier training and small unit leadership rather than the mass coordination required for effective phalanx warfare. Roman equipment reflected practical considerations developed through extensive combat experience against diverse opponents. Legionaries carried the gladius, a short stabbing sword designed for close-quarters combat, along with javelins called pila that could penetrate enemy shields and armour at medium ranges. Their defensive equipment included oval shields large enough to provide substantial protection, while remaining light enough for extended manoeuvring, supplemented by bronze helmets and mail shirts that offered reasonable protection without excessive weight. The strategic positioning of Roman forces in southern Italy reflected careful analysis of terrain features and communication routes that would influence the developing campaign. Laevinus established his main base at Venusia, a recently founded Latin colony, positioned to control the primary routes between Roman territories and the Greek cities of the coast. This location provided secure communications with Rome, while offering multiple options for advancing against enemy positions or withdrawing to more defensible terrain if circumstances required. Secondary Roman positions were established at key points throughout the region to monitor enemy movements while protecting allied communities that had remained loyal despite increasing pressure to join the anti-Roman coalition. These outposts, typically garrisoned by allied troops supplemented with Roman officers, served as intelligence-gathering centres while demonstrating continued Roman commitment to their supporters. The network of fortified positions created a framework for coordinated operations while providing fallback positions if main force engagements produced unfavourable results. Meanwhile, Pyrrhus's efforts to reorganise Tarentine society and military capabilities reveal the complex challenges involved in transforming a democratic city-state into an effective military base for sustained warfare. The Epirote king recognised that his ultimate success would depend heavily on maximising local resources while ensuring reliable cooperation from his Greek allies. This requirement led him to implement controversial reforms that fundamentally altered traditional Tarentine political and social arrangements. The implementation of martial law throughout Tarentum represented Pyrrhus's most dramatic departure from normal Greek political practice. Democratic assemblies were suspended for the duration of the military crisis, with executive authority concentrated in the hands of royal appointees, responsible directly to Pyrrhus himself. This arrangement ensured rapid decision-making and unified command, while eliminating the factional disputes that had previously paralysed Tarentine policy-making during critical moments. Pyrrhus's military reforms in Tarentum focused particularly on transforming the city's traditional citizen militia into a force capable of coordinating effectively with his professional epirote units. Tarentine citizens were subjected to intensive drill designed to familiarise them with phalanx formations and tactical procedures that differed significantly from their previous military experience. The training regimen emphasised discipline and unit cohesion over individual prowess, requiring fundamental changes in traditional Greek approaches to warfare that many citizens found difficult to accept. The reorganisation of Tarentine naval capabilities reflected Pyrrhus's recognition that control of sea communications would be essential for maintaining contact with potential allies and sources of supply throughout the Mediterranean. The city's fleet, while substantial, required modernisation and expansion to meet the challenges of coordinated operations against Roman and Allied naval forces. Shipbuilding programs were initiated to construct additional triremes and transport vessels, while existing ships underwent modifications to improve their combat effectiveness and cargo capacity. Economic mobilization throughout Tarentum involved the systematic conversion of civilian production facilities to military purposes. Workshops that had previously manufactured luxury goods for export were retooled to produce weapons, armour, and military equipment for the expanding Allied forces. Agricultural estates were reorganised to maximise food production, while providing horses and pack animals required for military operations. These changes, while necessary for military effectiveness, disrupted established economic relationships and created hardships for citizens whose livelihoods depended on normal commercial activities. The psychological impact of these dramatic changes on Tarentine society was profound and complex. Many citizens welcomed the decisive leadership that Pyrrhus provided after years of ineffective democratic deliberation, viewing temporary restrictions on political freedom as acceptable prices for effective resistance against Roman expansion. Others, particularly among the wealthy merchant classes, resented the disruption of profitable commercial relationships and the concentration of authority in foreign hands. The presence of Epirote soldiers throughout the city created additional tensions that reflected cultural differences between the disciplined professionalism of Pyrrhus's army and the more relaxed traditions of Greek civic life. Epirote military police enforced regulations regarding public assembly, commercial activities, and movement outside the city walls that many Tarentines found oppressive, despite their obvious military necessity. These restrictions, while maintaining security and order, generated resentment that enemy agents attempted to exploit through propaganda and subversion. News of Pyrrhus's arrival and the dramatic changes occurring in Tarentum spread rapidly throughout southern Italy, creating ripple effects that influenced political and military calculations in communities throughout the region. Greek cities that had remained neutral began reconsidering their positions as the prospect of effective resistance became more realistic. Italian tribes that had submitted to Roman authority started questioning whether continued cooperation served their long-term interests, given the changing military balance. The speed with which information travelled throughout the region reflected the sophisticated communication networks that had developed through centuries of trade and diplomatic interaction. Merchants, religious pilgrims, and diplomatic messengers carried detailed accounts of Pyrrhus's forces and Tarentine preparations. To audiences eager for intelligence about developments that would affect their own futures. These reports, while sometimes exaggerated or distorted, provided the foundation for political discussions and military planning throughout southern Italy. The Roman advance toward Heraclea in the spring of 280 BC represented Consul Valerius Laevinus's calculated attempt to force a decisive engagement before Pyrrhus could fully consolidate his position in southern Italy. Intelligence reports indicated that additional Greek cities were wavering in their loyalty to Rome, while Samnite and Lucanian tribal leaders had begun mobilizing their warriors in anticipation of coordinated action against Roman positions. Laevinus recognized that allowing the enemy coalition additional time to organize would only strengthen their position, while potentially encouraging further defections among Rome's Italian allies. The Roman army that marched south from Venusia consisted of 4 legions totaling approximately 35,000 men, including allied contingents from recently conquered territories. The force represented a substantial portion of Rome's available military strength, reflecting the seriousness with which the Senate viewed the threat posed by foreign intervention in Italian affairs. Laevinus had positioned his most experienced legions in the vanguard, with the Sciu and IVE legions leading the advance, while the Ephean 3 legions provided security for the army's flanks and supply train. The Roman tactical formation during the march reflected lessons learned through decades of warfare against diverse Italian opponents. The army advanced in multiple columns separated by sufficient distance to prevent a single enemy attack from disrupting the entire force, while maintaining close enough proximity for mutual support if circumstances required rapid concentration. Light troops, primarily drawn from allied communities with extensive local knowledge, provided reconnaissance screens that extended several miles ahead of the main body to detect enemy movements and identify potential ambush sites. Roman supply arrangements demonstrated the sophisticated logistical capabilities that had enabled their expansion throughout Italy. The army's baggage train included not only the standard complement of weapons, armour and equipment, but also portable workshops capable of repairing damaged gear and manufacturing replacement items during extended campaigns. Medical personnel organised into specialised units with established procedures for treating battlefield casualties accompanied each legion along with the surgical instruments and pharmaceutical supplies necessary for their work. Pyrrhus's response to reports of the Roman advance revealed his tactical acumen and deep understanding of the psychological factors that influenced ancient warfare. Rather than attempting to intercept the enemy during their march, when Roman formations would be at maximum readiness and organisation, the Epirote king chose to establish defensive positions near Heraclea that would force the Romans to attack under disadvantageous circumstances while maximising the shock effect of his war elephants on troops encountering them for the first time. The selection of Heraclea as the battle site reflected careful consideration of terrain features that would favour Pyrrhus's tactical methods while minimising Roman advantages in flexibility and unit coordination. The plain near the city provided sufficient space for deploying phalanx formations in their traditional dense arrangements, while the nearby Cirrus River offered opportunities for tactical manoeuvre that could exploit Roman unfamiliarity with elephant warfare. Hills on the northern edge of the battlefield provided elevated positions for observation and potential flanking movements, though their steep slopes made them unsuitable for heavy infantry operations. Pyrrhus's army at Heraclea numbered approximately 25,000 men, representing the diverse coalition he had assembled during his first months in Italy. The core of his force consisted of 16,000 Epirota phalangites organised into 4 tactical divisions, each commanded by experienced officers who had served in previous campaigns against Macedonian and Illyrian opponents. These professional soldiers formed the backbone of Pyrrhus's battle line, their bronze armour gleaming in the morning sun as they assumed their positions with the mechanical precision that characterised well-trained phalanx formations. Supporting the Epirote infantry were approximately 4,000 Tarentine and allied Greek troops whose recent training under Pyrrhus's supervision had improved their military capabilities while revealing the limitations imposed by their lack of extensive combat experience. These citizen soldiers, equipped with weapons and armour produced in Tarentine workshops, demonstrated enthusiasm for the coming battle that partially compensated for their tactical inexperience. Their placement in the battle line reflected Pyrrhus's careful assessment of their capabilities, positioning them where they could contribute effectively while remaining under the direct supervision of veteran Epiroti officers. The Italian tribal contingents, numbering roughly 5,000 warriors from various Samnite and Lucanian communities, brought with them fighting skills developed through generations of warfare against Roman expansion. These men, armed with javelins, longswords, and oval shields decorated with tribal emblems, excelled in individual combat and small unit tactics that complemented the more formal arrangements of Greek phalanx warfare. Their knowledge of local terrain and Roman tactical methods provided valuable intelligence, while their fierce hatred of Roman rule ensured their commitment to the anti-Roman cause. Pyrrhus's cavalry force of 3,000 horsemen represented the military elite of his coalition, drawn from the warrior aristocracies of Epirus, Tarentum, and allied Italian tribes. These mounted warriors, organised into squadrons of approximately 200 men each, carried long lances designed for shock combat, along with swords for close-quarters fighting. Their horses, carefully selected for size and temperament, had undergone extensive training to remain steady in the presence of war elephants, ensuring that friendly forces could coordinate effectively during battle. The 20 war elephants positioned at key points throughout Pyrrhus's formation constituted his most psychologically effective weapon against an enemy that had never encountered such creatures in combat. Each elephant carried a wooden tower containing 2 or 3 warriors armed with javelins and bows, while the animals themselves had been trained to use their tusks and bulk to break through enemy shield walls. The elephants' handlers, experienced Mayhouts recruited from India and North Africa, possessed intimate knowledge of their animals' capabilities and limitations that would prove crucial during the coming engagement. The Roman approach to the battlefield on the morning of the battle revealed both the confidence and caution that characterized their military doctrine. Laevinus deployed his legions in the traditional triplex aces formation, with Hastati in the front line, Principes in the second, and Triarii in reserve. This arrangement provided tactical flexibility while maintaining the unit cohesion that had proven effective against various Italian opponents. The consul positioned himself with the second line, where he could observe the battle's development while remaining available to commit reserves at critical moments. Roman cavalry, numbering approximately 1,200 horsemen drawn primarily from allied communities, took positions on both flanks where they could protect the infantry from enemy-mounted attacks while remaining available for pursuit operations if the battle developed favourably. These horsemen, while competent, lacked the aristocratic military traditions that characterized their opponents, making them potentially vulnerable to the shock tactics that Pyrrhus had perfected through years of warfare against similar forces. The initial Roman advance across the plain toward Pyrrhus's positions demonstrated the disciplined movement that had become characteristic of legionary warfare. Each maniple maintained its assigned position within the larger formation, while adapting to minor terrain variations that might disrupt less experienced units. Centurions moved constantly among their men, issuing orders and maintaining the steady pace that would bring them into javelin range of the enemy without exhausting the soldiers before combat began. Roman light troops, advancing ahead of the main battle line, engaged their Greek and Italian counterparts in the preliminary skirmishing that typically preceded major engagements. These encounters, while limited in scope, provided both sides with valuable intelligence about enemy morale and tactical organization. The Roman velites, armed with javelins and small shields, demonstrated their characteristic aggressiveness while revealing their unfamiliarity with the diverse fighting styles represented in Pyrrhus's coalition forces. The first sight of war elephants created immediate disruption in Roman ranks, as horses reared and bolted despite their riders' efforts to maintain control. The massive creatures, advancing slowly but inexorably toward the Roman lines, presented a psychological challenge for which traditional military training had provided no preparation. Roman cavalry units found themselves unable to approach the enemy flanks as planned, their mounts' terror at the elephant's unfamiliar scent and appearance making coordinated movement impossible. Pyrrhus's tactical deployment of his elephants demonstrated his sophisticated understanding of their proper employment in battle. Rather than concentrating all 20 animals in a single massive charge, he distributed them throughout his formation where they could provide maximum psychological impact while remaining protected by supporting infantry and cavalry units. The elephants positioned opposite the Roman cavalry were intended to neutralize that arm entirely, while those facing the legionary infantry would serve as mobile platforms for missile troops and as shock weapons capable of breaking through the manipular formations. The initial collision between the opposing forces occurred when Roman hastati reached javelin range and launched their pila at the advancing phalanx. The Roman missiles, designed to penetrate shields and armour at close range, struck the bronze-armoured front ranks of the Epirota formation with devastating effect. However, the density of the phalanx meant that fallen men were quickly replaced by those behind them, maintaining the formation's integrity despite significant casualties in the opening moments of combat. Pyrrhus's phalangites responded with their own missile barrages. Light troops positioned between the pike blocks hurled javelins at the advancing Romans. The exchange of projectiles created the characteristic preliminary phase of ancient battles, where both sides attempted to disrupt enemy formations and reduce their fighting effectiveness before the decisive melee combat began. The superior armour and training of the Epiroti professionals became evident during this phase, as they maintained better formation discipline despite suffering casualties from Roman missiles. The Roman cavalry's attempted flanking movement on the left wing met with immediate disaster as war elephants advanced to meet them. The sight and smell of these massive creatures caused widespread panic among the Roman horses, many of which threw their riders and fled toward the rear despite desperate efforts to maintain control. The few cavalrymen who managed to approach the elephants found their weapons ineffective against the animals' thick hides, while the warriors in the towers above rained javelins down upon them with deadly accuracy. Roman tactical doctrine had emphasized the importance of cavalry in providing flank security and pursuing defeated enemies, making the neutralization of this arm a severe blow to their overall battle plan. Laevinus recognized the crisis developing on his left wing and attempted to reinforce the position with allied infantry, but these troops proved equally vulnerable to elephant attacks when their supporting cavalry had been eliminated. The collapse of the Roman left created opportunities for Pyrrhus's cavalry to attack the main legionary formation from an unexpected direction. The central engagement between Roman manipular formations and Pyrrhus's phalanx revealed the fundamental differences between these tactical systems. Roman legionaries, trained to fight as individuals within small unit frameworks, found themselves confronting a wall of 18-foot pikes that prevented them from closing to the range where their short swords would be effective. The gladius, designed for thrusting attacks in close combat, proved inadequate against opponents who could engage from distances that Roman weapons could not match. Pyrrhus's phalangites, advancing in their traditional dense formation, presented a formidable obstacle that Roman tactical methods had not been designed to overcome. The Saracen, held at various angles to create multiple layers of spear points, created an impenetrable barrier that channeled Roman attacks into predetermined killing zones where concentrated missile fire could inflict maximum casualties. The bronze armour worn by the front ranks of the phalanx provided substantial protection against Roman javelins and sword thrusts, while the depth of the formation ensured that casualties could be replaced without disrupting overall unit cohesion. The Roman response to the tactical challenges posed by phalanx warfare demonstrated both their adaptability and the limitations of their current military system. Individual centurions attempted to coordinate attacks against specific sections of the enemy line, hoping to create gaps that could be exploited by follow-up assaults. Some Roman units tried to overlap the flanks of phalanx blocks, seeking to attack from angles where the long pikes would be less effective. However, these improvised tactics required coordination that was difficult to achieve in the noise and confusion of battle. The effectiveness of war elephants in disrupting Roman formations became increasingly apparent as the battle progressed. The animals, advancing under the protection of supporting infantry, created chaos wherever they appeared. Roman soldiers who had never encountered such creatures found their training inadequate for dealing with opponents that combined massive size with intelligent direction from their handlers. The wooden towers mounted on the elephants' backs provided elevated platforms for archers and javelin throwers, who could engage Roman troops while remaining relatively protected from ground-based attacks. Roman attempts to counter the elephant threat revealed both ingenuity and desperation, as individual soldiers and units tried various expedients to deal with these unprecedented opponents. Some legionaries attempted to wound the animals by targeting their legs and feet with their pila, while others tried to kill or disable the mahouts controlling them. A few Roman soldiers discovered that fire could frighten the elephants, leading to improvised attempts to create flaming missiles that might panic the animals and turn them against their own forces. The battle's turning point came when Pyrrhus personally led a cavalry charge against the Roman right wing, which had been weakened by the redeployment of troops to counter the elephant attacks on the opposite flank. The Epiroti king, recognisable by his distinctive armour and royal insignia, rode at the head of his elite cavalry squadrons in a charge that demonstrated both his personal courage and tactical acumen. The sight of their commander leading from the front inspired Pyrrhus's entire army, while creating additional pressure on Roman forces already struggling with unfamiliar tactical challenges. The Roman right wing, composed primarily of allied troops from recently conquered territories, began to waver under the combined pressure of cavalry attacks and advancing phalanx formations. These soldiers, while competent, lacked the experience and motivation of veteran Roman legionaries, making them vulnerable to the psychological warfare that Pyrrhus had perfected through years of campaigning. The collapse of allied units created gaps in the Roman line that Pyrrhus's forces were quick to exploit. Laevinus's attempts to restore the situation by committing his Triarii reserves demonstrated both the flexibility of Roman tactical doctrine and its limitations when confronting unfamiliar opponents. The veteran soldiers of the third line, equipped with long spears rather than the standard gladius and pilum combination, were better suited for engaging phalanx formations than their younger colleagues. However, their limited numbers and the multiple crises developing simultaneously across the battlefield made it impossible for them to restore Roman fortune single-handedly. The final phase of the battle saw the gradual collapse of Roman resistance as cumulative casualties and tactical disadvantages made continued fighting untenable. The loss of cavalry had eliminated Roman abilities to protect their flanks or conduct organised withdrawals, while the effectiveness of enemy elephants had disrupted the unit cohesion that was essential for manipular tactics. Individual Roman formations continued fighting with characteristic stubbornness, but the overall battle had been decided by factors beyond their control. Roman casualties at Heraclea were severe, with ancient sources reporting losses of approximately 7,000 killed and 2,000 captured from Laevinus's original force of 35,000 men. These figures, while possibly inflated by later historians seeking to emphasize Pyrrhus's tactical brilliance, reflected the devastating effectiveness of coordinated phalanx and elephant attacks against troops encountering such methods for the first time. The loss of experienced centurions and veteran soldiers represented a particularly serious blow to Roman military capabilities. Pyrrhus's losses, while significant, were proportionally lighter than those suffered by his opponents. Ancient accounts suggest that approximately 4,000 men from his coalition forces were killed or wounded, with the heaviest casualties occurring among the Epiroti phalangites, who had borne the brunt of Roman attacks. the death of several experienced officers, including some of Pyrrhus's closest advisors, highlighted the risks inherent in the aggressive tactics that had won the battle but at considerable cost to the army's leadership structure. The immediate strategic consequences of Heraclea extended far beyond the casualties suffered by both armies. For Rome, the defeat represented their first major setback since the conclusion of the Samnite Wars and raised serious questions about their ability to resist foreign intervention in Italian affairs. The loss of prestige associated with military defeat threatened to encourage defections among allied communities that had submitted to Roman authority, primarily because of their reputation for invincibility. Several Latin colonies in southern Italy began reconsidering their loyalty to Rome following news of the defeat, while tribal leaders who had remained neutral started exploring opportunities for joining the anti-Roman coalition. The psychological impact of Rome's first encounter with professional Hellenistic warfare had revealed vulnerabilities in their military system that enemies throughout the Mediterranean would be quick to exploit if not addressed through comprehensive reforms. For Pyrrhus and his coalition, victory at Heraclea provided validation of their strategy while creating new opportunities for expanding their anti-Roman alliance. Greek cities throughout Magna Graecia that had hesitated to commit themselves to either side now saw evidence that effective resistance to Roman expansion was possible with proper leadership and resources. The demonstration of war elephants' effectiveness against Roman cavalry encouraged tribal leaders to believe that coordinated action might achieve what individual resistance had failed to accomplish. The diplomatic aftermath of Heraclea saw Pyrrhus attempting to capitalize on his military success through a carefully orchestrated peace initiative designed to consolidate his gains while avoiding the costs of continued warfare. The Epiroti king recognized that his victory, while impressive, had been achieved at a price that could not be sustained through prolonged campaigning. The loss of experienced officers and veteran soldiers had reduced his army's effectiveness, while the logistical challenges of maintaining war elephants in Italian conditions created ongoing resource drains that threatened his long-term capabilities. Pyrrhus's selection of Cineas as his principal diplomatic representative reflected both personal trust and recognition of the complex negotiations that would be required to transform military victory into a lasting political settlement. Cineas, a Thessalian noble who had served as Pyrrhus's chief advisor for several years, possessed extensive knowledge of Roman political institutions and diplomatic practices that would be essential for conducting effective negotiations. His reputation for eloquence and intellectual sophistication made him an ideal choice for representing Hellenistic civilization to Roman audiences who might be unfamiliar with Greek diplomatic traditions. The embassy's journey to Rome occurred during the summer of 280 BC, when news of Heraclea had already reached the city and created intense debate about appropriate responses to the military crisis. Cineas travelled with a substantial retinue that included not only diplomatic personnel, but also carefully selected prisoners of war, whose treatment would demonstrate Pyrrhus's magnanimity while providing opportunities for informal communication with Roman leaders. The embassy's route through Roman territory allowed Cineas to observe firsthand the military preparations and public mood that would influence the success of his diplomatic mission. The diplomatic triumph achieved by Cineas in Rome during the summer of 280 BC had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of the Italian conflict. Yet the Epiroti king recognized that military pressure remained essential for transforming negotiated agreements into lasting political reality. Roman rejection of his peace proposals, influenced by the fierce rhetoric of Appius Claudius Caecus and the Senate's determination to maintain their expanding hegemony, convinced Pyrrhus that only a direct threat to Rome itself would compel serious reconsideration of his terms. The decision to march north through Latium represented both the logical culmination of his Italian strategy and the most audacious gamble of his military career. The preparation for Pyrrhus's northern campaign required extensive reorganization of his forces, following the costly victory at Heraclea and subsequent operations throughout southern Italy. His army had grown substantially through the recruitment of allied contingents from Greek cities and Italian tribes, but these additions created new logistical challenges while diluting the professional quality that had characterized his original Epirota expedition. The integration of approximately 8,000 additional Greek infantry from Tarentum, Locri and other allied cities provided numerical strength, but required intensive training to coordinate effectively with his veteran phalangites. The Samnite and Lucanian tribal levies that joined Pyrrhus's forces brought their own tactical traditions and equipment standards that complicated unified command structures. These warriors, numbering roughly 12,000 men from various tribal confederations, excelled in irregular warfare and possessed intimate knowledge of central Italian terrain. But their loose organisational methods and preference for individual combat created friction with the disciplined formations that Pyrrhus favoured. Their leaders, accustomed to autonomous decision-making within tribal councils, required careful diplomatic handling to maintain their commitment to coordinated operations under foreign command. The logistical requirements for moving this expanded army of nearly 40,000 men through the mountainous terrain between southern Italy and Rome presented challenges that tested even Pyrrhus's considerable organisational capabilities. Each war elephant required approximately 300 pounds of fodder daily, along with substantial quantities of water that might not be readily available during extended marches through arid regions. The animal's handlers had identified specific plants and grains that could substitute for their preferred diet, but securing adequate supplies required advanced planning and coordination with local communities along the projected route. The army's baggage train had expanded proportionally with the addition of allied contingents, creating a vulnerable column that stretched for several miles and moved at the pace of its slowest components. Pyrrhus's engineers had constructed specialised wagons for transporting siege equipment and military supplies, while medical personnel organised portable hospitals capable of treating battlefield casualties during extended campaigns. The inclusion of substantial numbers of non-combatants, including camp followers, merchants and craftsmen necessary for maintaining equipment, further complicated movement and security arrangements. Pyrrhus's selection of his route through Latium reflected careful analysis of terrain features, Roman defensive preparations, and the political loyalties of communities along potential lines of advance. Intelligence gathered through Samnite contacts indicated that the most direct route through the Apennine passes would encounter heavily fortified Roman positions designed to channel enemy forces into predetermined killing zones. Alternative approaches through coastal regions offered better supply opportunities, but exposed the army to potential naval attacks from Roman and Allied fleets operating from secure bases. The chosen route led north through Lucanian territory, before turning west toward the Latin coast, taking advantage of tribal alliances while avoiding the strongest Roman fortifications in the mountainous interior. This approach required crossing several rivers during the spring flooding season, necessitating the construction of temporary bridges capable of supporting war elephants and heavy equipment. Pyrrhus's engineers, trained in the sophisticated methods developed by Alexander's successors, possessed the technical expertise for such projects, but required substantial labour forces and raw materials that had to be organised in advance. The march itself began in early spring of 279 BC, timed to take advantage of improving weather conditions, while avoiding the summer heat that would create additional hardships for both men and animals. Pyrrhus organised his army into multiple columns that could move independently while maintaining mutual support, reducing the vulnerability that would result from concentrating all forces in a single formation. The advance guard, composed primarily of Samnite and Lucanian light troops familiar with local conditions, provided reconnaissance and security while establishing supply depots for the main body. The psychological impact of Pyrrhus's advance reverberated throughout central Italy, as news of the approaching army spread through established communication networks. Roman colonies established in conquered territories found themselves isolated and vulnerable, their garrisons insufficient to resist a determined siege, while too valuable to abandon without major political consequences. Many colonial administrators began evacuating non-essential personnel while strengthening fortifications and stockpiling supplies for potential sieges. The loyalty of recently conquered Italian communities faced severe testing as Pyrrhus's forces approached their territories. Tribal leaders who had submitted to Roman authority primarily from necessity rather than conviction began reconsidering their positions as the military balance shifted. Secret negotiations between Pyrrhus's representatives and local chieftains created opportunities for coordinated uprisings that could isolate Roman garrisons while providing the invading army with additional manpower and local knowledge. Roman intelligence networks, carefully cultivated throughout their Italian expansion, provided detailed reports of enemy movements while revealing the extent of anti-Roman sentiment in supposedly pacified territories. Consul Marcus Curius Dentatus, commanding the forces responsible for defending central Italy, received regular updates on Pyrrhus's progress, while coordinating defensive preparations designed to maximize Roman advantages in familiar terrain. The intelligence indicated that enemy forces were experiencing significant logistical difficulties, particularly regarding the maintenance of war elephants in unfamiliar climatic conditions. The Roman defensive strategy developed in response to Pyrrhus's advance demonstrated sophisticated understanding of their enemy's capabilities and limitations. Rather than attempting to meet the invading army in open battle where war elephants and phalanx formations would provide maximum advantage, Roman commanders concentrated their forces in fortified positions that could withstand siege while threatening enemy supply lines. The strategy emphasized attrition and delay, recognizing that Pyrrhus's coalition would become increasingly difficult to maintain as the campaign extended beyond its initial objectives. The mobilization of Roman military reserves represented the most comprehensive military effort in the Republic's history to that point. Emergency levies called up citizens who had completed their normal military service, while allied communities throughout central and northern Italy received orders to provide additional contingents for the defense of Rome itself. The Senate authorized the recruitment of auxiliary forces from Gallic tribes north of the Apennines, offering substantial payments and territorial concessions in exchange for military support against the Greek invasion. Roman engineering efforts focused on strengthening existing fortifications, while constructing new defensive works designed to channel enemy attacks into predetermined zones where Roman tactical advantages could be maximized. The construction of field fortifications, palisades and obstacles required enormous labor inputs that were provided through the mobilization of civilian populations from threatened areas. These defensive preparations, while extensive, also revealed Roman recognition that their traditional tactical methods had proven inadequate against Pyrrhus's military innovations. The diplomatic crisis that accompanied Pyrrhus's advance towards Rome created unprecedented tensions within the Roman political system as different factions debated appropriate responses to the military threat. Conservative senators, led by Appius Claudius Caecus, despite his advanced age and physical infirmities, maintained that any negotiation with foreign invaders would establish dangerous precedents that could encourage future interventions in Italian affairs. Their position emphasized the fundamental principle that Rome's Italian hegemony was non-negotiable regardless of immediate military circumstances. Moderate voices within the Senate, recognizing the serious military challenges posed by professional Hellenistic warfare, advocated tactical concessions that might preserve Roman interests while avoiding the catastrophic losses that could result from continued resistance. These senators argued that temporary territorial adjustments in southern Italy represented acceptable costs for maintaining Roman control over their more valuable possessions in central Italy and preventing the formation of permanent anti-Roman coalitions. The role of Appius Claudius Caecus in shaping Roman policy during this crisis demonstrated the continued influence of traditional republican values despite changing military realities. The elderly statesman, whose earlier career had included major engineering projects and military campaigns, possessed moral authority that transcended factional divisions within the Senate. His passionate speeches emphasizing Roman dignity and the precedent-setting nature of foreign demands resonated with senators who feared that accommodation would invite additional challenges to Roman authority. Appius Claudius's physical condition, including the blindness that had given him his cognomen, created dramatic visual impact during Senate debates as he was carried into the chamber to deliver speeches that combined personal authority with appeals to traditional Roman values. His arguments emphasized that Roman military setbacks resulted from unfamiliarity with enemy tactics, rather than fundamental weaknesses in Roman military capabilities, suggesting that adaptation and perseverance would ultimately produce victory over foreign intervention. The internal Roman political debate revealed fundamental disagreements about the nature of Roman expansion and the principles that should guide policy during military crises. Traditionalist senators viewed Roman hegemony in Italy as the foundation of their city's security and prosperity, making territorial concessions unacceptable regardless of immediate military pressures. Progressive voices argued that Roman interests could be preserved through diplomatic flexibility that acknowledged changing power relationships while maintaining essential strategic positions. The influence of public opinion on senatorial deliberations created additional complications as news of Pyrrhus's advance generated panic among Roman citizens who had never experienced foreign invasion of Italian territory. Popular assemblies demanded decisive action while simultaneously expressing concern about the casualties that might result from continued military resistance. The contradiction between demands for effective defence and reluctance to accept the costs of warfare created political pressures that complicated rational strategic planning. Pyrrhus's intelligence regarding Roman political divisions influenced his operational planning, as he recognised that sustained military pressure might produce the internal dissension necessary for achieving his diplomatic objectives. His agents in Rome, operating through commercial and cultural contacts established during previous negotiations, provided detailed reports of senatorial debates while identifying potential supporters among Romans who favoured peaceful resolution of the conflict. This intelligence suggested that prolonged military pressure combined with generous peace terms might eventually overcome conservative resistance to negotiated settlement. The logistical challenges that emerged during Pyrrhus's advance through central Italy gradually undermined the initial confidence that had characterized his northern campaign. The war elephants, stressed by unfamiliar climate conditions and irregular feeding schedules, began showing signs of illness that threatened their combat effectiveness. Several animals developed foot problems from extended marching on rocky terrain, while others exhibited behavioural changes that made them dangerous to their own handlers and nearby troops. The supply difficulties experienced by Pyrrhus's forces reflected both the scale of his logistical requirements and the effectiveness of Roman defensive preparations. Local communities, intimidated by Roman threats of retaliation, proved reluctant to provide the quantities of grain, fodder, and other supplies necessary for maintaining such a large army during extended operations. The army's foraging activities, while successful in meeting immediate needs, created hostile relationships with Italian populations whose support would be essential for any permanent political settlement. The medical challenges faced by Pyrrhus's diverse coalition forces revealed the difficulties of maintaining army cohesion during extended campaigns in unfamiliar territory. Disease outbreaks, particularly among troops from different climatic regions, reduced effective strength while creating additional burdens for the army's medical services. The integration of soldiers from various cultural backgrounds while providing tactical advantages also created communication difficulties and disciplinary problems that required constant attention from senior officers. Intelligence reports reaching Pyrrhus during his advance indicated that Roman military preparations were proceeding more rapidly than anticipated, with substantial reinforcements being concentrated in defensive positions along his projected route towards Rome. The mobilization of Roman reserves, combined with the arrival of Allied contingents from throughout central Italy, suggested that any assault on Roman positions would encounter significantly stronger resistance than originally calculated. These developments forced reconsideration of operational objectives, while highlighting the risks inherent in extended operations far from secure bases. The strategic situation that developed as Pyrrhus approached the outskirts of Roman territory represented the culmination of nearly 2 years of warfare that had transformed the political landscape of southern Italy while creating unprecedented challenges for both sides. The Epiroti king's military successes had demonstrated the vulnerability of Roman tactical methods to professional Hellenistic warfare, but they had also revealed the enormous costs associated with maintaining such forces during extended campaigns in hostile territory. The approaching confrontation would determine whether military innovation could overcome the demographic and economic advantages that had enabled Roman expansion throughout Italy, or whether traditional Roman persistence and adaptability would ultimately prevail against foreign intervention. The final phase of Pyrrhus's advance toward Rome occurred during the late spring of 279 BC, as his forces moved through the Latin countryside that had been the heartland of Roman expansion for over 2 centuries. The proximity to Rome itself created psychological pressures on both sides that transcended purely military considerations, as the symbolic importance of the city made retreat or defeat particularly costly for either army. Roman defensive preparations had concentrated substantial forces in positions designed to protect the approaches to their capital, while Pyrrhus recognized that failure to achieve decisive results would undermine his entire Italian strategy and potentially trigger the collapse of his anti-Roman coalition. The withdrawal from the gates of Rome in the summer of 279 BC marked a critical turning point in Pyrrhus's Italian campaign, though the Epiroti king skillfully presented his strategic retreat as a tactical repositioning designed to consolidate gains rather than acknowledge defeat. The proximity to the Roman capital had achieved its intended psychological impact, forcing the Senate to confront the reality of foreign invasion while demonstrating that Roman territorial heartlands were not immune to external threats. However, the failure to force a decisive political settlement through military pressure had exposed fundamental weaknesses in Pyrrhus's strategic position that would influence all subsequent operations. The Roman defensive preparations that had frustrated Pyrrhus's advance revealed the sophisticated military engineering capabilities that complemented their tactical innovations. Consul Marcus Curius Dentatus had established multiple defensive lines anchored on natural terrain features, with each position designed to channel enemy attacks into predetermined killing zones where Roman advantages in close-quarters combat could be maximized. The extensive use of field fortifications, including ditches, palisades, and concealed obstacles, demonstrated Roman adaptation to the challenges posed by war elephants and phalanx formations. Roman intelligence gathering during Pyrrhus's northern campaign had provided detailed observations of enemy tactical methods that would prove invaluable for future engagements. Scouts and deserters reported specific information about elephant handling procedures, phalanx organization, and the coordination methods used to integrate diverse allied contingents into unified battle formations. This intelligence revealed vulnerabilities in Pyrrhus's military system that Roman commanders could exploit through appropriate tactical modifications and equipment innovations. The development of anti-elephant devices represented the most significant Roman military innovation, prompted by their encounters with Pyrrhus's forces. Roman engineers, working with metalworkers and craftsmen throughout central Italy, had designed various weapons and obstacles specifically intended to counter the psychological and physical advantages provided by war elephants. These innovations included fire arrows designed to panic the animals, specialized spears with barbed points that could wound elephants while remaining embedded in their flesh, and portable barriers that could channel elephant charges into predetermined areas. The most effective anti-elephant innovation involved the systematic training of Roman cavalry horses to overcome their instinctive fear of these massive creatures. Through gradual exposure to elephant scents and sounds, combined with intensive conditioning exercises, Roman horse trainers had begun developing mounted units capable of operating effectively in the presence of war elephants. This training program, while time-consuming and expensive, addressed one of the most serious tactical disadvantages that Roman forces had experienced in previous encounters with Pyrrhus's army. Roman tactical adaptations extended beyond specific anti-elephant measures to encompass comprehensive modifications of manipular formations designed to improve their effectiveness against phalanx warfare. The traditional spacing between maniples, which had proven vulnerable to the long reach of Surisai, was adjusted to provide better mutual support while maintaining the flexibility that distinguished Roman tactics from rigid Greek formations. Centurions received additional training in coordinating attacks against specific sections of enemy phalanxes, focusing on techniques for creating gaps that could be exploited by follow-up assaults. The modification of Roman equipment reflected lessons learned from direct combat experience with professional Hellenistic forces. The pilum underwent design changes that improved its effectiveness against the bronze armour worn by Epirota phalangites, while experiments with longer spears provided Roman infantry with weapons capable of engaging pike formations at greater distances. Shield designs were modified to provide better protection against the coordinated missile attacks that typically preceded phalanx charges, while improvements in armour manufacturing increased the defensive capabilities available to Roman soldiers. Pyrrhus's strategic reassessment, following his withdrawal from Rome, led to fundamental changes in his approach to the Italian conflict. The failure to achieve decisive political results through military pressure had demonstrated the limitations of his coalition's resources, while revealing the resilience of Roman political institutions under extreme stress. The Epirotic king recognised that continued operations in central Italy would require modifications to his tactical methods and operational objectives that could address the defensive innovations that Romans had begun implementing. The return to southern Italy during the autumn of 279 BC provided Pyrrhus with opportunities to reorganise his forces while addressing the logistical problems that had undermined his northern campaign. The war elephants, stressed by extended operations in unfamiliar climatic conditions, required extensive veterinary care and specialised feeding programs designed to restore their combat effectiveness. Several animals had died during the campaign, reducing Pyrrhus's most psychologically effective weapon, while highlighting the difficulties of maintaining such exotic military assets during extended operations. The integration of additional allied forces into Pyrrhus's army reflected both the success of his diplomatic efforts and the challenges created by commanding increasingly diverse military contingents. Bruttian tribal levies, numbering approximately 6,000 warriors, brought specialized knowledge of southern Italian terrain, along with fierce hatred of Roman expansion that ensured their commitment to the anti-Roman cause. However, their tactical traditions and equipment standards differed significantly from both Greek phalanx methods and the irregular warfare practiced by Samnite and Lucanian allies. Roman preparations for renewed conflict demonstrated the systematic approach that had characterized their expansion throughout Italy. Consul Publius Decius Mus, assigned to command operations against Pyrrhus during 279 BC, had concentrated substantial forces in positions designed to protect Roman allies while threatening enemy supply lines. The Roman strategy emphasized the defensive advantages provided by fortified positions, while preparing for offensive operations that could exploit anticipated weaknesses in enemy formations. The selection of Asculum as the site for the next major engagement reflected Pyrrhus's recognition that he needed a decisive military victory to restore momentum to his Italian campaign. The city's strategic position in Apulia provided access to the tribal territories that had supplied many of his allied contingents, while its location offered opportunities for coordinating operations with other Greek cities throughout Magna Graecia. The terrain surrounding Asculum presented both advantages and challenges for the tactical methods that Pyrrhus had developed through years of warfare against various opponents. The plain near Asculum stretched for several miles between low hills that provided observation points while limiting opportunities for flanking movements. The relatively flat terrain favoured the deployment of phalanx formations in their traditional dense arrangements, while scattered groves and rocky outcroppings offered positions for light troops and missile units. A small river crossed the battlefield, providing water sources for both armies while creating potential obstacles for cavalry operations and elephant movements. Roman intelligence regarding Pyrrhus's movements toward Asculum had provided Decius Mus with sufficient warning to concentrate his forces and select defensive positions that maximised Roman tactical advantages. The consul had positioned his army to take advantage of the terrain features that would limit enemy elephant effectiveness, while providing secure flanks for his manipular formations. Roman engineers had constructed field fortifications designed to channel enemy attacks while providing fallback positions if circumstances required tactical withdrawal. The Roman army that assembled near Asculum represented the largest force that the Republic had deployed during the Italian conflict, reflecting both the seriousness of the threat posed by foreign intervention and the military lessons learned from previous encounters with Pyrrhus's forces. 4 full legions, totaling approximately 40,000 men including allied contingents, provided the core of Roman strength while demonstrating the demographic advantages that enabled sustained military operations despite previous casualties. The composition of Roman forces at Asculum revealed significant changes in equipment and organisation designed to address the specific challenges posed by Hellenistic warfare. Each legion included expanded numbers of light troops trained in anti-elephant tactics, while cavalry units had undergone intensive conditioning programs designed to overcome their horses' fear of these massive creatures. Roman engineers had developed portable siege equipment and specialised weapons intended to neutralise the advantages provided by enemy phalanx formations. Pyrrhus's army approaching Asculum had grown to approximately 35,000 men through the recruitment of additional allied contingents, but this numerical strength concealed significant problems in unit cohesion and tactical coordination. The diversity of his coalition forces, while providing tactical flexibility, had created communication difficulties and training challenges that required constant attention from senior officers. The integration of tribal levies with different combat traditions had proven particularly problematic during complex manoeuvres that required precise timing and coordination. The war elephants that accompanied Pyrrhus to Asculum numbered only 18 animals, reflecting both combat losses and the deaths of several creatures during the stressful northern campaign. The surviving elephants had undergone intensive retraining designed to improve their effectiveness against Roman tactical innovations, while their handlers had developed new techniques for coordinating elephant attacks with supporting infantry and cavalry units. Despite these improvements, the reduced number of elephants limited their psychological impact while making each animal's loss increasingly significant for overall tactical capabilities. The preliminary skirmishing that preceded the main engagement at Asculum extended over 2 days as both armies manoeuvred for advantageous positions while conducting reconnaissance operations designed to identify enemy weaknesses. Roman light troops, operating in coordination with allied cavalry units, probed Pyrrhus's defensive arrangements while testing the effectiveness of their anti-elephant training. These encounters revealed that Roman tactical modifications had achieved some success, though the fundamental challenges posed by professional Hellenistic warfare remained largely unresolved. Pyrrhus's deployment for the Battle of Asculum reflected his accumulated experience with Roman tactical methods, while incorporating innovations designed to address the defensive improvements that his enemies had implemented. The Epirotic phalanx occupied the centre of his battle line, with supporting light troops positioned in the intervals between pike blocks to provide missile support and tactical flexibility. The war elephants were distributed throughout the formation rather than concentrated in a single massive charge, maximising their psychological impact while reducing their vulnerability to coordinated Roman countermeasures. The tactical innovations implemented by both sides at Asculum demonstrated the rapid military evolution that characterised the Italian conflict. Roman forces had developed specialised anti-elephant units equipped with fire weapons and long spears, while their cavalry had undergone training programs designed to operate effectively in the presence of these massive creatures. Pyrrhus had modified his phalanx formations to provide better protection against Roman missile attacks while improving coordination between different types of military units. The first day of battle at Asculum began with extensive skirmishing between light troops as both armies tested enemy dispositions while positioning their main formations for decisive engagement. Roman velites, armed with improved javelins designed to penetrate bronze armour, engaged their Greek and Italian counterparts in preliminary combats that revealed the enhanced training and equipment that both sides had implemented since their previous encounters. The effectiveness of Roman anti-elephant preparations became apparent during these initial phases, as several war elephants were wounded by specialised weapons and forced to withdraw from forward positions. The main engagement commenced when Pyrrhus ordered his phalanx to advance against Roman positions, creating the characteristic collision between manipular and pike formations that had defined previous battles. However, the tactical modifications implemented by both sides had altered the dynamics of this confrontation significantly. Roman maniples demonstrated improved coordination in their attacks against phalanx blocks, while Pyrrhus's forces showed better integration between different military arms and enhanced protection against Roman missile attacks. The Roman response to the advancing phalanx revealed the extent of their tactical learning since Heraclea. Individual maniples coordinated their movements to create overlapping attacks against specific sections of the enemy line, while specialised units equipped with longer spears engaged the phalangites at distances that reduced the effectiveness of their sarissy. Roman cavalry, operating with horses trained to tolerate elephant presence, attempted flanking movements that had proven impossible during previous encounters. The war elephant's impact at Asculum, while still significant, demonstrated the effectiveness of Roman countermeasures that had been developed through careful study of enemy methods. Several animals were wounded or panicked by fire weapons, while others found their movements channeled by portable obstacles that limited their tactical effectiveness. The wooden towers mounted on the elephants' backs remained dangerous platforms for enemy missile troops, but Roman archers had developed techniques for targeting these elevated positions with improved accuracy. The intensity of combat at Asculum exceeded that of previous engagements, as both sides committed their full resources to achieving decisive results. The battle extended through 2 full days of fighting, with neither army able to achieve the breakthrough that would determine the conflict's outcome. Casualties mounted steadily as Roman persistence confronted Greek professional skill in a grinding attritional struggle that tested the endurance and morale of both forces. The horrific casualty rates that characterised the Battle of Asculum created the historical precedent that would give rise to the term Pyrrhic victory. Ancient sources report that Pyrrhus lost approximately 3,500 men from his original force, including many of his most experienced officers and veteran soldiers whose combat expertise could not be easily replaced. The death of several elephant handlers and the wounding of additional war elephants further reduced his most effective tactical assets, while highlighting the unsustainable nature of his military methods. Roman casualties at Asculum were equally severe, with estimates suggesting losses of approximately 6,000 men from Decius Mus's army. However, the demographic advantages that Rome possessed through its Italian confederation meant that these losses, while painful, could be replaced through additional levies and allied contributions. The Roman system's ability to sustain heavy casualties while maintaining operational effectiveness contrasted sharply with Pyrrhus's dependence on irreplaceable professional soldiers and exotic military equipment. The psychological impact of Asculum's casualties extended far beyond the immediate military consequences to affect the morale and strategic calculations of both sides. Pyrrhus's famous observation that another such victory would destroy him entirely reflected his recognition that the attrition rate experienced during the battle was unsustainable for his limited resources. The loss of experienced officers and veteran soldiers had reduced his army's tactical effectiveness while eliminating much of the professional expertise that had enabled his previous successes. Roman morale, despite the heavy casualties suffered at Asculum, remained relatively stable due to their confidence in their ability to replace losses while gradually adapting their tactical methods to counter enemy innovations. The demonstrated effectiveness of their anti-elephant measures and improved coordination against phalanx formations suggested that continued resistance would eventually produce favourable results. The Roman political system's resilience under military pressure had been proven through their rejection of Pyrrhus's peace overtures, creating confidence that persistence would ultimately prevail over foreign intervention. The strategic stalemate that emerged following Asculum reflected the fundamental limitations that both sides faced in achieving decisive results through continued warfare in Italy. Pyrrhus had demonstrated his tactical superiority while revealing the unsustainable costs associated with maintaining professional forces during extended operations far from secure bases. Roman resistance had proven more resilient than anticipated, while showing gradual improvement in methods for countering Hellenistic military innovations. The influence of Asculum on Pyrrhus's strategic thinking became apparent through his subsequent decisions to seek opportunities elsewhere, rather than continuing the grinding attritional warfare that characterized operations in Italy. The invitation from Syracuse to intervene in Sicilian affairs offered prospects for achieving decisive results with smaller forces while potentially providing the resources necessary for renewed operations against Rome. The decision to redirect his efforts towards Sicily reflected both the opportunities available there and his recognition that continued Italian operations had reached a point of diminishing returns. The invitation that arrived at Pyrrhus's camp near Asculum during the autumn of 279 BC represented far more than a simple request for military assistance. The Syracusan embassy, led by Thoanon and accompanied by representatives from several other Sicilian Greek cities, carried with them detailed intelligence about Carthaginian military dispositions, comprehensive assessments of the island's economic resources, and most significantly formal authorization to negotiate terms that could transform Sicily into the foundation of a Western Mediterranean empire. The timing of this diplomatic overture, arriving in the aftermath of the costly stalemate at Asculum, provided Pyrrhus with an opportunity to redirect his military capabilities toward objectives that promised greater rewards with potentially lower risks than continued operations against Rome's increasingly effective defensive preparations. The Carthaginian threat to Greek Sicily had been developing steadily throughout the early 3rd century BC, as the North African power sought to consolidate its control over the Western Mediterranean trade routes that formed the backbone of its commercial empire. Carthaginian forces had already secured most of western Sicily, including the crucial fortress city of Lilybaeum, which served as their primary naval base and logistical centre for operations throughout the region. The systematic Carthaginian advance had isolated Syracuse and its remaining Greek allies, creating desperate circumstances that forced traditionally independent city-states to seek foreign military assistance despite their historical reluctance to submit to external authority. The strategic importance of Sicily extended far beyond its immediate value to encompass broader questions of Mediterranean power relationships that would influence the development of both Roman and Carthaginian imperial ambitions. The island's fertile plains produced grain surpluses that could feed substantial populations while supporting large military forces, making it an invaluable asset for any power seeking to project influence throughout the Mediterranean basin. The harbours of Syracuse, Messana, and other coastal cities provided secure bases for naval operations, while the island's position between Italy and North Africa made it a crucial link in the commercial networks that connected the eastern and western Mediterranean regions. Pyrrhus's analysis of the Sicilian situation revealed opportunities that aligned perfectly with his strategic objectives and military capabilities. The Carthaginian forces occupying western Sicily, while numerous and well-equipped, lacked the tactical sophistication and professional training that characterized Roman legions. Carthaginian military organization relied heavily on mercenary contingents recruited from throughout the Mediterranean, creating potential vulnerabilities in unit cohesion and long-term reliability that could be exploited by skilled commanders. The absence of war elephants in Carthaginian Sicilian forces eliminated one of the primary tactical challenges that had complicated operations against Roman armies. The decision to accept the Syracusan invitation required careful consideration of the logistical challenges involved in transferring substantial military forces from Italy to Sicily while maintaining sufficient strength to prevent Roman exploitation of his temporary absence. The narrow Strait of Messina, while providing the shortest route between the two theatres of operation, was controlled by the city of Messana, whose loyalty remained questionable due to recent political upheavals and the presence of Mamertine mercenaries who had seized control of the urban government. Alternative routes across the open waters between southern Italy and eastern Sicily offered greater security but required more extensive naval preparations and created additional risks from adverse weather conditions. The composition of the force that Pyrrhus selected for his Sicilian expedition reflected both the specific requirements of the anticipated campaign and the need to maintain adequate defences in his Italian territories. Approximately 8,000 of his most experienced Epirota phalangites form the core of the expeditionary force, their professional training and proven combat effectiveness making them ideal for the rapid operations that would be necessary to achieve decisive results before Carthaginian reinforcements could arrive from North Africa. Supporting light troops, numbering roughly 3,000 men drawn from various allied contingents, provided tactical flexibility while reducing the logistical burden associated with maintaining heavy infantry formations during extended operations. The cavalry component of Pyrrhus's Sicilian force consisted of approximately 500 horsemen, representing the military elite of his coalition. These mounted warriors, selected for their experience and reliability rather than sheer numbers, brought with them detailed knowledge of enemy tactical methods developed through years of warfare against diverse opponents. Their reduced numbers reflected both the transportation challenges associated with moving cavalry across water and Pyrrhus's assessment that the terrain and tactical situation in Sicily would favour infantry operations over the mobile warfare that had characterised his Italian campaigns. The inclusion of only 8 war elephants in the Sicilian expedition demonstrated Pyrrhus's recognition of the logistical constraints that limited his ability to maintain these valuable assets during extended operations away from secure bases. The selected animals represented the largest and most experienced specimens from his original force, their handlers having developed specialised techniques for naval transportation that minimised the stress and health risks associated with sea voyages. The reduced number of elephants would limit their psychological impact, but also decrease the expedition's vulnerability to the supply disruptions that had plagued his Italian operations. The crossing from Rhegium to Messana in early 278 BC required extensive coordination between Pyrrhus's military forces and the Tarentine naval units that provided transportation and escort services for the expedition. The Tarentan fleet, while substantial, lacked experience in the complex maneuvers required for amphibious operations, necessitating intensive training programs that familiarized crews with the specialized procedures necessary for landing troops and equipment on potentially hostile shores. The presence of Carthaginian naval patrols in the waters around Sicily created additional security concerns that required careful timing and route selection to minimize the risk of interception during the vulnerable crossing phase. The initial reception that Pyrrhus received in Syracuse exceeded even the optimistic expectations that had influenced his decision to accept the Sicilian invitation. The city's population, desperate for effective leadership after years of ineffective resistance to Carthaginian expansion, welcomed the Epirote king with celebrations that rivaled those traditionally reserved for victorious Olympic athletes or successful military commanders returning from foreign conquests. The sight of professional phalangites marching through Syracusan streets, their bronze armour gleaming in the Mediterranean sunlight, provided tangible evidence that effective resistance to Carthaginian domination had become possible through foreign military assistance. The formal ceremonies that accompanied Pyrrhus's assumption of supreme command in Syracuse revealed both the extent of Greek desperation and the sophisticated political calculations that had influenced the invitation. The city's assembly, following established constitutional procedures, voted to grant Pyrrhus unprecedented authority over military operations while maintaining nominal independence in internal affairs. This arrangement balanced Syracusan desires for effective leadership with their determination to preserve the democratic institutions that distinguish Greek civilization from the monarchical systems that characterized Hellenistic kingdoms. The strategic assessment that Pyrrhus conducted during his first weeks in Syracuse provided detailed intelligence about Carthaginian military capabilities, while revealing the extent of the challenges that would be required to achieve lasting success in Sicily. Carthaginian forces on the island numbered approximately 50,000 men organized into various contingents that reflected the diverse recruitment methods employed throughout their Mediterranean empire. Libyan infantry, recruited from the agricultural regions surrounding Carthage itself, formed the backbone of their heavy forces, while Numidian cavalry provided mobility and reconnaissance capabilities that had proven effective in previous North African campaigns. The mercenary contingents that comprised the majority of Carthaginian forces in Sicily included Spanish swordsmen renowned for their individual combat skills, Gallic warriors whose fierce reputation had made them valuable assets in previous campaigns, and various specialized units recruited from throughout the Mediterranean basin. These diverse forces, while individually competent, lack the unified training and tactical coordination that characterize professional armies, creating potential vulnerabilities that skilled opponents could exploit through appropriate strategic and tactical approaches. Carthaginian defensive preparations in western Sicily demonstrated the sophisticated engineering capabilities that had enabled their expansion throughout the Mediterranean region. The fortress of Lilybaeum, anchored on a peninsula that projected into the sea, had been strengthened with multiple defensive walls, elaborate gate systems, and harbour facilities capable of supporting substantial naval forces. The city's position made it virtually impregnable to direct assault while providing secure communications with North African bases that could supply reinforcements and logistical support during extended sieges. The network of fortified positions that connected Lilybaeum with other Carthaginian strongholds throughout western Sicily revealed the systematic approach that had characterized their conquest of the region. Each fortress controlled strategic routes and communication nodes while providing mutual support that made isolated attacks ineffective. The Carthaginian strategy emphasized defensive strength combined with naval mobility, allowing them to concentrate forces rapidly at threatened points while maintaining secure supply lines that could sustain extended operations. Pyrrhus's initial operations in Sicily focused on consolidating Greek resistance while demonstrating his military capabilities to potential allies throughout the island. His first major engagement occurred at Heraclea Minoa, where a Carthaginian force of approximately 8,000 men had established positions threatening the communications between Syracuse and the remaining independent Greek cities. The battle, fought on terrain that favoured phalanx formations over the loose tactical arrangements preferred by Carthaginian mercenaries, resulted in a decisive victory that eliminated enemy threats to eastern Sicily, while capturing substantial quantities of military equipment and supplies. The psychological impact of this initial success reverberated throughout Sicily as news of Pyrrhus's victory spread through established communication networks. Greek cities that had remained neutral or submitted to Carthaginian pressure began reconsidering their positions as the prospect of effective resistance became realistic for the first time in years. Agrigentum, once the most powerful Greek city in Sicily after Syracuse, sent secret embassies exploring the possibilities for coordinated action against their Carthaginian occupiers. The siege of Panormus represented Pyrrhus's first major test against a heavily fortified Carthaginian position defended by substantial garrison forces. The city's walls, constructed according to the latest military engineering principles, presented formidable obstacles that required sophisticated siege techniques and specialized equipment. Pyrrhus's engineers, trained in the methods developed by Alexander's successors, constructed elaborate siege works including towers, battering rams, and catapults designed to breach the defensive fortifications while protecting the attacking forces from enemy countermeasures. The effectiveness of Pyrrhus's siege operations demonstrated the technological advantages that professional Hellenistic armies possessed over the more traditional military methods employed by Carthaginian forces. The coordinated use of artillery, mining operations, and direct assault techniques created multiple simultaneous threats that overwhelmed the defenders' ability to respond effectively. The fall of Panormus after a siege of only 6 weeks provided Pyrrhus with a major strategic victory while capturing one of the most important commercial centres in western Sicily. The rapid succession of victories that followed Panormus revealed both the effectiveness of Pyrrhus's military methods and the fundamental weaknesses in Carthaginian defensive arrangements throughout Sicily. Segesta, Eryx, and numerous smaller fortified positions surrendered rather than face the siege techniques that had proven so effective against Panormus. The Carthaginian strategy of dispersed defensive positions, while providing mutual support under normal circumstances, became a liability when confronted by an enemy capable of reducing individual strongholds faster than reinforcements could be organized and deployed. The transformation of Pyrrhus's strategic position during his first year in Sicily was remarkable by any standard of ancient warfare. By the end of 278 BC, Carthaginian forces had been driven from all of eastern and central Sicily, retaining only the fortress of Lilybaeum and a few minor coastal positions that remained secure due to their naval connections with North African bases. The liberation of Syracuse's traditional sphere of influence had been achieved with minimal casualties while demonstrating that Carthaginian military power, despite its reputation and resources, was vulnerable to professional military leadership and appropriate tactical methods. However, the very completeness of Pyrrhus's military success created new challenges that would ultimately undermine his position in Sicily. The rapid elimination of external threats reduced the sense of urgency that had initially motivated Greek cooperation with his authority, while the authoritarian methods that he had employed to achieve military efficiency began generating resentment among populations accustomed to democratic self-governance. The concentration of power in royal hands, justified by military necessity during the crisis, became increasingly difficult to maintain as the immediate Carthaginian threat receded. The administrative reforms that Pyrrhus implemented throughout liberated Sicily reflected his understanding that military success required political consolidation to achieve lasting results. Traditional democratic assemblies were suspended or severely restricted in their authority, with executive power concentrated in the hands of royal appointees, responsible directly to Pyrrhus himself. These arrangements ensured rapid decision-making and unified command, while eliminating the factional disputes that had previously paralysed Greek policy-making during critical moments. The economic mobilisation that accompanied Pyrrhus's political reforms involved systematic conversion of Sicilian resources to support his military objectives and long-term strategic plans. Agricultural production was reorganised to maximise grain exports that could finance continued military operations, while urban workshops were converted to produce weapons, armour and military equipment for the expanding Allied forces. Harbour facilities throughout eastern Sicily were modernised and expanded to accommodate the naval forces necessary for maintaining communications with potential allies throughout the Mediterranean. The taxation systems that Pyrrhus established to fund his Sicilian operations created particular resentment among the wealthy merchant classes who had previously enjoyed substantial autonomy in their commercial activities. The royal monopolies on certain luxury goods and the standardization of weights and measures, while improving administrative efficiency, disrupted established trading relationships and reduced the profits that had traditionally supported Greek urban civilization. These economic pressures, combined with the political restrictions on democratic participation, created growing opposition to Pyrrhus's authority among precisely those social groups whose support was essential for long-term stability. The military preparations for the siege of Lilybaeum represented the culmination of Pyrrhus's Sicilian strategy and the ultimate test of his ability to achieve complete victory over Carthaginian forces in the western Mediterranean. The fortress city's position on its peninsula made conventional siege approaches extremely difficult, while its naval connections with North Africa ensured that Carthaginian reinforcements and supplies could continue reaching the garrison despite land-based blockade efforts. The reduction of Lilybaeum would require innovative siege techniques combined with naval operations that exceeded the capabilities of traditional Greek military methods. The construction of elaborate siege works around Lilybaeum demonstrated both the engineering expertise available to Pyrrhus and the enormous resource commitments required for operations against the most sophisticated fortifications of the ancient world. Massive earthworks were constructed to provide protected approaches to the city walls, while specialized siege engines were assembled to breach the multiple defensive barriers that protected the urban core. The logistical requirements for maintaining thousands of soldiers during an extended siege created unprecedented demands on Sicilian agricultural and commercial resources. The naval blockade that accompanied the land siege revealed the limitations of Greek naval capabilities when confronted by the sophisticated maritime technology that had enabled Carthaginian expansion throughout the Mediterranean. Carthaginian ships, designed specifically for the challenging conditions of open ocean warfare, possessed advantages in speed and maneuverability that made effective blockade operations extremely difficult to maintain. The arrival of Carthaginian relief expeditions from North Africa repeatedly broke through Greek naval cordons, resupplying the Lilybaeum garrison while demonstrating the continuing vitality of Carthaginian resistance. The prolonged nature of the Lilybaeum siege gradually undermined both the military effectiveness of Pyrrhus's forces and the political stability of his Sicilian administration. The enormous costs associated with maintaining siege operations strained the island's economic resources while creating hardships for civilian populations whose agricultural production had been disrupted by military requirements. The apparent invulnerability of the Carthaginian fortress began generating doubts about Pyrrhus's military capabilities, while encouraging his opponents to believe that continued resistance might eventually produce favourable results. The growing opposition to Pyrrhus's authority throughout Sicily reflected both the specific grievances created by his authoritarian methods and broader cultural tensions between Hellenistic monarchical traditions and the democratic values that had characterized Greek civilization for centuries. Wealthy landowners resented the economic controls that had reduced their traditional autonomy, while urban populations complained about the restrictions on political participation that had eliminated their influence over policy decisions affecting their daily lives. The suspension of traditional festivals and cultural activities, justified by military necessity, created additional sources of popular discontent that enemy agents were quick to exploit. The intelligence networks that Carthaginian agents had established throughout Sicily provided detailed information about the growing opposition to Pyrrhus's rule, while creating opportunities for coordinated subversion that could undermine Greek military effectiveness. Secret communications between Carthaginian representatives and disaffected Sicilian leaders explored possibilities for internal uprisings that could coincide with military operations designed to relieve the pressure on Lilybaeum. These diplomatic efforts, while requiring careful coordination to avoid detection, offered prospects for achieving through political means what military resistance had failed to accomplish. The arrival of disturbing intelligence from Italy during the winter of 276 BCC created additional pressures that forced Pyrrhus to reconsider his strategic priorities and resource allocations. Roman forces, taking advantage of his absence from the Italian theatre, had begun systematic operations against his remaining allies while strengthening their own positions throughout southern Italy. The reports indicated that several Greek cities were wavering in their loyalty to the anti-Roman coalition, while tribal leaders who had previously supported Pyrrhus were exploring accommodation with Roman authorities who offered attractive terms for submission. The deteriorating situation in Italy highlighted the fundamental strategic dilemma that had characterized Pyrrhus's entire Mediterranean strategy. The division of his limited resources between multiple theatres of operation had prevented him from achieving decisive results in either region, while the extended duration of his campaigns had strained both his military capabilities and the loyalty of his diverse coalition partners. The prospect of losing his Italian gains while becoming bogged down in an unsuccessful siege of Lilybaeum forced reconsideration of priorities that had seemed clear during the initial phases of his Sicilian intervention. The Roman-Carthaginian cooperation that had begun developing during Pyrrhus's absence from Italy represented a significant diplomatic achievement that strengthened both powers' positions while creating new challenges for their common enemy. The treaty arrangements that formalized this cooperation provided for mutual assistance in operations against Pyrrhus, while establishing protocols for coordinating naval and military activities that could maximize their combined effectiveness. This alliance, while tactical rather than strategic in nature, demonstrated the adaptability of both Roman and Carthaginian diplomacy when confronted by threats to their fundamental interests. The urgent dispatches that reached Pyrrhus at his siege camp outside Lilybaeum during the spring of 275 BC carried news that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his western Mediterranean ambitions. Roman forces under consul Manius Curius Dentatus had systematically dismantled the defensive arrangements that Pyrrhus had established throughout southern Italy, while his Tarentine allies faced increasing pressure from coordinated Roman naval and land operations. The intelligence reports, smuggled through Carthaginian blockade lines by loyal Epiroti agents, revealed that several key fortified positions had fallen to Roman assault, while tribal leaders who had previously supported the anti-Roman coalition were negotiating separate peace agreements that threatened to isolate the remaining Greek cities. The strategic situation that confronted Pyrrhus as he contemplated abandoning the Sicilian campaign represented the culmination of nearly 3 years of warfare that had demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of his military methods. His forces in Sicily, while still formidable, had been reduced through combat losses, disease and desertion to approximately 12,000 effective soldiers, including only 6,000 of his original Epiroti professionals. The prolonged siege operations against Lilybaeum had consumed enormous quantities of equipment and supplies while producing no tangible strategic gains, creating logistical strains that would complicate any rapid redeployment to the Italian theatre. The war elephants that had survived the Sicilian campaign numbered only 6 animals, their handlers reporting various health problems that reflected the stress of extended operations in unfamiliar climatic conditions. Several elephants had developed foot ailments from prolonged exposure to the rocky terrain surrounding Lilybaeum, while others exhibited behavioural changes that made them potentially dangerous to their own forces during combat operations. The veterinary specialists who accompanied Pyrrhus's expedition had developed treatment protocols that addressed some of these issues, but the reduced number of effective elephants severely limited their psychological impact against enemies who had never encountered such creatures. The decision to abandon the Sicilian campaign required careful coordination to prevent Carthaginian forces from intercepting his withdrawal, while simultaneously organising the complex logistical arrangements necessary for transporting substantial military forces across the strait to Italy. The Carthaginian naval presence around western Sicily had been reinforced during the siege of Lilybaeum, with squadrons of fast warships positioned to intercept Greek vessels attempting to maintain communications with the Italian mainland. These patrol activities had already disrupted several supply convoys, demonstrating Carthaginian determination to exploit any opportunity created by Pyrrhus's strategic repositioning. The evacuation from Sicily began during the summer of 275 BC, utilising a combination of Tarentine vessels and captured Carthaginian ships that had been modified for troop transport duties. The operation required multiple voyages to transfer all personnel and equipment safely, creating extended periods of vulnerability during which Carthaginian naval forces might have achieved devastating results through coordinated attacks. However, the systematic withdrawal proceeded without major incident, reflecting both careful planning and the continuing effectiveness of Pyrrhus's intelligence networks in monitoring enemy movements and intentions. The landing at Locri in late summer 275 BC provided Pyrrhus with his first direct assessment of the deteriorated strategic situation that had developed during his absence from Italy. The city's defences had been strengthened through Roman engineering assistance, while the harbour facilities showed evidence of recent naval combat that had disrupted normal commercial activities. Local officials reported that Roman forces had conducted systematic raids throughout the region, destroying agricultural installations and capturing livestock in operations designed to undermine economic support for the anti-Roman coalition. The intelligence briefings that Pyrrhus received during his first weeks back in Italy revealed the extent to which Roman tactical doctrine had evolved in response to their previous encounters with professional Hellenistic warfare. Roman legions had been reorganised and re-equipped with improved weapons specifically designed to counter phalanx formations and war elephant attacks. The manipular system had been modified to provide better coordination between individual units while maintaining the tactical flexibility that distinguished Roman methods from the rigid formations employed by most contemporary armies. Roman anti-elephant preparations had achieved particular sophistication during Pyrrhus's absence, with specialised units trained in coordinated tactics designed to neutralise these psychologically effective weapons. Roman engineers had developed various devices including fire arrows, barbed spears, and portable obstacles that could channel elephant charges into predetermined killing zones where concentrated missile fire could wound the animals or eliminate their handlers. Perhaps most significantly, Roman cavalry horses had undergone extensive conditioning programs that enabled them to operate effectively in the presence of war elephants, eliminating one of the primary tactical advantages that these creatures had provided in previous engagements. The Roman army that Pyrrhus would face upon his return to Italy represented the most formidable force that the Republic had ever assembled for operations in the southern peninsula. Consul Manius Curius Dentatus commanded approximately 45,000 men organised into 5 legions, plus extensive allied contingents drawn from throughout central Italy. This force reflected both the demographic advantages that Rome possessed through its Italian confederation and the military lessons learned through 3 years of warfare against professional Hellenistic opponents. The composition of Roman forces demonstrated significant improvements in equipment and training that addressed the specific challenges posed by Pyrrhus's tactical methods. Each legion included expanded numbers of light troops equipped with specialized anti-elephant weapons, while heavy infantry units had received additional spears designed to engage phalanx formations at greater distances. Roman cavalry had been reorganized into larger squadrons capable of coordinated maneuvers, while their horses had undergone conditioning programs that eliminated the panic responses that had characterized previous encounters with war elephants. Roman logistical capabilities had also undergone substantial improvements during Pyrrhus's absence, with supply systems designed to support extended operations in hostile territory while maintaining secure communications with bases throughout central Italy. Mobile workshops accompanied each legion to provide equipment maintenance and replacement services, while medical units had been expanded and professionalized to handle the casualties associated with intensive combat operations. These improvements reflected Roman recognition that success against professional opponents required systematic attention to all aspects of military organization, rather than relying solely on individual soldier quality and tactical flexibility. The strategic positioning that Dentatus had established throughout southern Italy demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the terrain features and communication routes that would influence the developing campaign. Roman forces occupied fortified positions that controlled the primary routes between the coast and interior regions, while advanced detachments monitored potential landing sites where enemy reinforcements might arrive from Sicily or other Mediterranean locations. The network of Roman positions created a framework for coordinated operations while providing secure bases for offensive actions designed to eliminate remaining pockets of anti-Roman resistance. Pyrrhus's assessment of his strategic options upon returning to Italy revealed the limited choices available given his reduced military resources and the strengthened Roman positions throughout the region. His army, depleted by the Sicilian campaign, numbered approximately 20,000 men, including only 8,000 Epirota professionals, whose combat effectiveness remained high despite their extended service. The Allied contingents that had remained loyal during his absence included roughly 6,000 Greek troops from various Magna Graecian cities and approximately 6,000 tribal warriors whose local knowledge and fierce anti-Roman sentiment partially compensated for their limited training in formal military operations. The selection of Beneventum as the site for what would prove to be the decisive engagement of the Italian campaign reflected both strategic necessity and tactical opportunity. The city's position controlled the primary route between Roman territories and the Greek cities of the coast, making it essential for maintaining communications and supply lines, regardless of which side ultimately controlled the position. The surrounding terrain offered advantages for both phalanx formations and manipular tactics, creating conditions where superior leadership and troop quality would likely determine the engagement's outcome. The approach march that brought Pyrrhus's forces to Beneventum during the autumn of 275 BC revealed both the continuing loyalty of his core supporters and the challenges created by his reduced military capabilities. The 6 remaining war elephants, while still psychologically impressive, lacked the overwhelming impact that larger numbers had provided in previous campaigns. The handlers reported ongoing health concerns that limited the animals' effectiveness during extended marches, while the reduced number meant that their loss during combat would eliminate this tactical advantage entirely. The Roman defensive preparations around Beneventum demonstrated the systematic engineering capabilities that had characterized their expansion throughout Italy. Dentatus had positioned his legions to take advantage of natural terrain features while constructing field fortifications that channeled potential enemy attacks into predetermined zones where Roman tactical advantages could be maximized. The extensive use of obstacles, ditches, and palisades revealed Roman determination to neutralize the mobility advantages that had enabled Pyrrhus's previous tactical successes. The preliminary skirmishing that preceded the main engagement at Beneventum extended over several days as both armies manoeuvred for advantageous positions while conducting reconnaissance operations designed to identify enemy weaknesses and capabilities. Roman light troops, operating with improved coordination and specialized equipment, probed Pyrrhus's defensive arrangements while testing the effectiveness of their anti-elephant training against the reduced number of animals available to their opponents. These encounters revealed that Roman tactical modifications had achieved significant success in addressing the challenges that had frustrated their previous efforts. Pyrrhus's deployment for the Battle of Beneventum reflected his accumulated experience with Roman methods while acknowledging the limitations imposed by his reduced forces and equipment. The Epiroti phalanx occupied the centre of his battle line, with the 6 war elephants distributed to provide maximum psychological impact rather than concentrated in a single formation. Light troops filled the intervals between major units, while tribal contingents were positioned where their individual fighting skills could contribute effectively without requiring complex coordination with unfamiliar tactical systems. The tactical innovations that both sides implemented at Beneventum demonstrated the rapid military evolution that had characterized the Italian conflict. Roman forces deployed specialized anti-elephant units in coordinated positions designed to create overlapping fields of fire that could wound the animals or eliminate their handlers before they reached the main battle line. Portable barriers had been positioned to channel elephant charges into predetermined areas, where concentrated attacks could neutralize their effectiveness, while minimizing casualties among Roman troops. Roman cavalry operations at Beneventum revealed the success of their conditioning programs in overcoming horses' instinctive fear of war elephants. The mounted units that had previously fled in panic at the mere sight of these creatures now maintained formation discipline while executing coordinated attacks against enemy positions. This fundamental change in Roman cavalry effectiveness eliminated one of the primary tactical advantages that Pyrrhus had exploited in previous engagements, while providing new opportunities for flanking movements and pursuit operations. The opening phases of the Battle of Beneventum began with extensive missile exchanges as both armies tested enemy formations while positioning their main units for decisive engagement. Roman light troops, equipped with improved javelins and specialized anti-elephant weapons, engaged their counterparts in preliminary combat that revealed the enhanced training and equipment that had been implemented during Pyrrhus's absence. The effectiveness of Roman preparations became apparent immediately as several war elephants were wounded by coordinated missile attacks that forced their withdrawal from forward positions. The advance of Pyrrhus's phalanx against Roman positions created the characteristic collision between pike formations and manipular tactics that had defined previous major engagements. However, the tactical modifications implemented by both sides had fundamentally altered the dynamics of this confrontation. Roman maniples demonstrated improved coordination in their attacks against phalanx blocks, while their enhanced equipment provided better capabilities for engaging enemy formations at distances that reduced the effectiveness of Saracen. The Roman response to the advancing phalanx revealed the extent of their tactical learning since Asculum. Individual maniples coordinated their movements to create simultaneous attacks against multiple sections of the enemy line, while specialized units equipped with longer spears engaged the phalangites at ranges where Roman weapons could be effective. The systematic nature of these attacks reflected careful planning and extensive training that had transformed Roman capabilities for dealing with professional Hellenistic warfare. The war elephant's impact at Beneventum, while still significant, demonstrated the decisive effectiveness of Roman countermeasures that had been developed through systematic study of enemy methods. The animals found their movements channeled by portable obstacles that limited their tactical flexibility, while exposing them to concentrated missile attacks from multiple directions. Fire arrows and barbed spears wounded several elephants during the early phases of combat, creating panic that disrupted their coordination with supporting infantry units. The decisive moment of the battle occurred when Roman cavalry, operating with horses trained to tolerate elephant presence, executed a coordinated flanking attack that exploited gaps created by the withdrawal of wounded war elephants. The sight of Roman horsemen advancing steadily despite the presence of these massive creatures provided dramatic evidence of their tactical adaptation, while creating psychological pressure on Pyrrhus's forces who had relied on elephant effectiveness in previous engagements. The collapse of Pyrrhus's left wing under coordinated Roman cavalry and infantry attacks created cascading effects throughout his battle line, as units that had maintained cohesion despite heavy casualties began wavering when their flanks became exposed. The loss of several war elephants had eliminated crucial tactical assets, while demonstrating that Roman countermeasures had achieved decisive effectiveness. The systematic nature of Roman attacks, coordinated across multiple sections of the battlefield, revealed planning capabilities that matched their improved tactical execution. The final phases of Beneventum saw the gradual disintegration of Pyrrhus's coalition as mounting casualties and tactical disadvantages made continued resistance untenable. The death of several senior Epirote officers eliminated much of the professional expertise that had enabled coordination between diverse allied contingents, while the loss of war elephants had removed the psychological advantage that had sustained morale during previous difficult engagements. Individual units continued fighting with characteristic determination, but the overall tactical situation had become hopeless. Roman pursuit operations following their victory at Beneventum demonstrated both the effectiveness of their improved cavalry capabilities and their systematic approach to eliminating enemy resistance. The coordinated pursuit, involving both mounted units and light infantry, prevented Pyrrhus from conducting the organised withdrawal that had preserved substantial portions of his army after previous defeats. The Roman ability to maintain pressure on retreating enemies reflected their enhanced tactical coordination and the confidence that came from finally achieving decisive success against their most formidable opponent. The casualties suffered at Beneventum effectively ended Pyrrhus's ability to conduct major offensive operations in Italy. His losses included approximately 5,000 men from his original force, with particularly heavy casualties among the irreplaceable Epirote professionals, whose combat expertise could not be readily restored. The death of veteran officers and the loss of all remaining war elephants eliminated the tactical advantages that had enabled his previous successes, while highlighting the unsustainable nature of his military methods when confronted by adaptive opponents. Roman losses at Beneventum, while substantial, were proportionally lighter and more easily replaced through the demographic advantages provided by their Italian confederation. The demonstrated effectiveness of their tactical adaptations and improved equipment provided confidence that continued resistance by remaining enemy forces could be overcome through systematic application of the methods that had proven successful. The psychological impact of achieving decisive victory over Pyrrhus transformed Roman military confidence, while demonstrating to potential enemies throughout the Mediterranean that professional Hellenistic warfare could be countered through appropriate preparation and tactical innovation. The aftermath of Beneventum reverberated across the Mediterranean with the force of a seismic shift, fundamentally altering the balance of power that had defined the ancient world for generations. Pyrrhus's withdrawal from Italy in early 274 BC marked not merely the end of a military campaign, but the conclusion of the last serious challenge to Roman expansion in the Italian peninsula. The Epirote king's departure, conducted with the remnants of his once formidable army aboard Tarentine vessels under cover of darkness, symbolised the failure of professional Hellenistic military methods to overcome Roman adaptability and demographic advantages when sustained over extended periods. The immediate consolidation of Roman authority throughout southern Italy proceeded with methodical efficiency that reflected both their accumulated experience in territorial administration and their determination to prevent future foreign interventions. Tarentum, the jewel of Magna Graecia, and the primary catalyst for Pyrrhus's involvement, faced particularly harsh treatment designed to serve as an example to other communities contemplating resistance. The city's democratic institutions were dissolved and replaced by a Roman garrison commanded by a military prefect answerable directly to the Senate. The famous harbour that had sheltered Pyrrhus's war elephants and served as the gateway for Hellenistic intervention was fortified with Roman engineering works, transforming it from a potential enemy base into a secure Roman naval facility. The transformation of Tarentum's economic structure revealed the systematic approach that Romans employed in integrating conquered territories into their expanding confederation. The purple dye workshops that had made Tarentine luxury goods famous throughout the Mediterranean were reorganized under Roman supervision, with production redirected toward Roman markets and military requirements. The city's extensive agricultural estates were redistributed to Roman colonists and loyal Italian allies, disrupting traditional landholding patterns while ensuring that future economic development would support Roman rather than Greek interests. Other Greek cities throughout Magna Graecia experienced varying degrees of integration based on their level of cooperation with Pyrrhus's coalition and their strategic importance to Roman objectives. Locri Episiphoria, despite its late support for the Epirotic cause, retained limited autonomy due to its cooperation with Roman forces during the final phases of the conflict. The city's leaders were required to provide hostages as guarantees of future loyalty while accepting the permanent presence of a Roman garrison that monitored political activities and ensured compliance with treaty obligations. Croton and Rhegium, having maintained neutrality or provided limited assistance to Roman operations, received more favourable treatment that preserved their traditional institutions while incorporating them into the Roman alliance system. These arrangements demonstrated Roman sophistication in calibrating their responses to local conditions while achieving their fundamental objective of preventing future challenges to their Italian hegemony. The varied treatment of Greek cities created incentives for cooperation while establishing clear consequences for resistance that would influence political calculations throughout the Mediterranean. The fate of Italian tribal communities that had supported Pyrrhus revealed both Roman pragmatism and their long-term strategic vision for peninsula-wide integration. Samnite tribes that had provided substantial military support for the anti-Roman coalition faced systematic displacement from their traditional territories, with Roman colonies established in strategic locations to prevent future coordination of tribal resistance. The harsh treatment of Samnite communities, including the execution of prominent leaders and the enslavement of thousands of warriors, served notice that Roman patience with repeated rebellions had reached its limits. Lucanian and Bruttian communities received differentiated treatment based on their specific roles in the conflict and their potential value as Roman allies. Tribal leaders who had maintained communications with Roman commanders during the later phases of the war were confirmed in their positions while accepting Roman oversight of their military capabilities. The integration of these communities into the Roman Confederation provided valuable manpower for future campaigns while extending Roman influence throughout the mountainous regions that had previously served as refuges for anti-Roman resistance. The military lessons that Romans extracted from their prolonged conflict with Pyrrhus fundamentally transformed their tactical doctrine and strategic thinking in ways that would influence their approach to Mediterranean expansion for centuries. The development of effective anti-elephant countermeasures, while specific to their encounters with Pyrrhus, reflected broader principles of tactical adaptation that became characteristic of Roman military culture. The systematic study of enemy methods, followed by the development of appropriate countermeasures and the training programs necessary to implement them effectively, established precedents for future encounters with unfamiliar military technologies and tactical systems. Roman equipment modifications that had proven effective against Hellenistic warfare were standardized and incorporated into regular legionary training programs. The longer spears that had enabled Roman infantry to engage phalanx formations at greater distances became standard equipment for specialized units, while improvements in shield design and armor manufacturing enhanced defensive capabilities against the coordinated missile attacks that characterized professional armies. These technological adaptations, combined with the tactical flexibility that had always distinguished Roman methods, created military capabilities that could compete successfully with any contemporary force. The transformation of Roman cavalry from a supporting arm into an effective independent force represented perhaps the most significant tactical evolution prompted by the Pyrrhic War. The conditioning programs that had enabled Roman horses to operate effectively in the presence of war elephants were expanded to address other psychological challenges that cavalry might encounter during Mediterranean operations. The organizational changes that created larger, more coordinated cavalry formations provided Romans with capabilities for reconnaissance, pursuit, and flanking operations that had previously been limited by their reliance on allied contingents with questionable loyalty and varying training standards. Roman engineering capabilities, already sophisticated by contemporary standards, received additional impetus from their observations of Hellenistic siege techniques and defensive innovations. The portable siege equipment that Pyrrhus had employed against Italian fortifications was studied and adapted to Roman requirements, while the field fortification methods that had proven effective in channeling enemy attacks were incorporated into standard defensive procedures. These technical improvements enhanced Roman capabilities for conducting extended campaigns in hostile territory while providing defensive advantages that could offset enemy superiority in specific tactical areas. The diplomatic revolution that accompanied Roman military adaptation reflected their recognition that successful Mediterranean expansion would require more sophisticated political methods than the primarily military approach that had characterized their Italian conquests. The alliance with Carthage that had developed during the later phases of the Pyrrhic War, while tactical in nature, demonstrated Roman willingness to coordinate with former enemies when circumstances required such cooperation. The precedent established by this collaboration would influence Roman diplomatic approaches throughout their subsequent expansion into Sicily and the Eastern Mediterranean. Roman intelligence gathering capabilities, proven effective during their conflict with Pyrrhus, were systematized and expanded to provide comprehensive information about potential enemies throughout the Mediterranean basin. The networks of merchants, diplomats, and military observers that had monitored Pyrrhus's activities were redirected toward gathering intelligence about Carthaginian capabilities, Hellenistic kingdom politics, and the military potential of various Mediterranean communities. This intelligence infrastructure provided the foundation for informed strategic planning that would characterize Roman expansion over the following centuries. The impact of Roman victory on Hellenistic political calculations extended far beyond the immediate participants to influence power relationships throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Pyrrhus's failure in Italy demonstrated that professional military excellence alone was insufficient to overcome the demographic and economic advantages possessed by well-organized territorial states. The lesson was not lost on the major Hellenistic kingdoms, whose rulers recognized that future conflicts with Rome would require different strategies and more substantial resource commitments than traditional military campaigns had typically demanded. The Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, which had provided indirect support for Pyrrhus through diplomatic channels and limited material assistance, reassessed its Mediterranean policies in light of Roman capabilities demonstrated during the Italian conflict. Egyptian intelligence networks reported detailed assessments of Roman military innovations and political resilience that influenced Ptolemaic strategic planning for potential future conflicts. the recognition that Rome represented a qualitatively different challenge than traditional Hellenistic opponents led to modifications in Egyptian military organization and diplomatic approaches that would shape their policies throughout the 3rd century BC. The Seleucid Empire, preoccupied with eastern expansion and internal consolidation, nevertheless monitored Roman developments with increasing concern as reports of their tactical adaptations and political stability reached Antioch. The implications of Roman success against professional Hellenistic warfare were particularly troubling for Seleucid planners, who recognized that their own military system shared many characteristics with Pyrrhus's forces. The need to develop countermeasures for potential Roman expansion into the eastern Mediterranean became a significant factor in Seleucid military planning and resource allocation decisions. Antigonid Macedonia, geographically closest to the expanding Roman sphere of influence, faced the most immediate challenges from the precedent established by Pyrrhus's defeat. The demonstration that Roman military methods could successfully counter traditional Macedonian tactical superiority forced fundamental reassessment of defensive strategies and alliance policies throughout the Greek mainland. The political fragmentation that characterized Hellenistic Greece made coordinated resistance to Roman expansion increasingly difficult. The example of Italian Greek cities that had suffered harsh treatment for supporting foreign intervention discouraged potential coalition building. The transformation of Mediterranean trade patterns following Roman consolidation of southern Italy created new economic realities that influenced political relationships throughout the region. The integration of Magna Graecian commercial networks into the Roman economic system redirected trade flows that had previously connected the Greek cities with their traditional partners in the eastern Mediterranean. Roman control of strategic harbours and their systematic development of commercial infrastructure created new opportunities for merchants willing to operate within Roman-controlled territories, while limiting options for communities that remained outside the expanding Roman sphere. The cultural implications of Roman victory extended beyond immediate political and economic changes to encompass broader questions about the future of Hellenistic civilization in the Western Mediterranean. The harsh treatment of Greek cities that had supported Pyrrhus sent clear messages about Roman attitudes toward foreign cultural influences and political autonomy. While Romans demonstrated practical flexibility in accommodating local traditions when such accommodation served their interests, the fundamental requirement for political subordination created pressures for cultural assimilation that would gradually transform the character of Greek communities throughout southern Italy. The preservation of Greek cultural institutions and communities that had cooperated with Roman authorities created precedents for the complex relationship between Roman political control and Hellenistic intellectual traditions that would characterize their subsequent expansion into the eastern Mediterranean. The selective adoption of Greek educational methods, architectural styles, and philosophical concepts by Roman elites reflected their recognition that Hellenistic culture offered valuable resources for governing their expanding empire, while the requirement for political loyalty ensured that such cultural borrowing occurred within frameworks that reinforced rather than challenged Roman authority. Roman historical memory of the Pyrrhic War became deeply embedded in their collective consciousness as both a source of pride in their military adaptability and a cautionary tale about the dangers of foreign intervention in Italian affairs. The stories of individual heroism and tactical innovation that had enabled victory over professional Hellenistic forces became standard elements in Roman military education, while the political lessons about the importance of maintaining alliance loyalty and preventing enemy coalition building influenced strategic planning for future campaigns. The commemoration of Roman victory through public monuments, religious ceremonies, and historical narratives created lasting cultural frameworks that shaped Roman attitudes toward both military expansion and foreign peoples throughout their subsequent history. The temples dedicated to gods who had supposedly favoured Roman arms during the conflict, the triumphal processions that celebrated returning commanders, and the written accounts that preserve details of tactical innovations for future generations all contributed to a cultural mythology that reinforced Roman confidence in their military capabilities and political institutions. The influence of Pyrrhic war experiences on subsequent Roman expansion into Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean was profound and lasting. The tactical methods that had proven effective against Hellenistic warfare were systematically applied during later conflicts with Macedonian and Seleucid forces, while the diplomatic approaches that had successfully isolated Pyrrhus were adapted to prevent enemy coalition building during Roman operations in more distant theatres. The intelligence-gathering capabilities and logistical systems that had been developed during the Italian conflict provided foundations for the more ambitious campaigns that would ultimately bring the entire Mediterranean under Roman control. The precedent established by Roman treatment of Greek cities during and after the Pyrrhic War influenced their policies toward Hellenistic communities throughout their subsequent expansion. The combination of harsh punishment for resistance with generous rewards for cooperation became a standard feature of Roman diplomatic practice, creating incentives for submission while demonstrating the consequences of opposition. This approach, refined through experience in Italy, proved effective in managing the complex political relationships that characterized Roman expansion into regions with established cultural and political traditions. The transformation of the Mediterranean world that began with Roman victory over Pyrrhus represented one of the most significant turning points in ancient history. The demonstration that adaptable political institutions combined with demographic advantages could overcome professional military excellence established principles that would govern power relationships throughout the ancient world for centuries. The systematic integration of conquered territories into expanding political structures created precedents for imperial administration that would influence governmental development throughout the Mediterranean basin and beyond. The legacy of the Pyrrhic War thus extended far beyond the immediate military and political consequences of Roman victory to encompass fundamental changes in the nature of Mediterranean civilization. The precedents established during this conflict regarding military adaptation, diplomatic practice, territorial administration, and cultural integration would shape the development of Roman imperial institutions while influencing the responses of other Mediterranean peoples to the expanding Roman presence. The transformation that began with Pyrrhus's landing at Tarentum in 280 BC ultimately culminated in the creation of a unified Mediterranean world under Roman hegemony, making the Pyrrhic War a crucial turning point in the transition from the Hellenistic period to the Roman imperial age that would define the ancient world for the next 5 centuries.